Chapter 1: The Last Herd. The sky above the wasteland was the color of rusted steel. Red dust drifted across the flatlands in long, weary ribbons, smudging the horizon where a once great forest had stood. Wind turbines, their blades cracked and idle, jutted from the ground like bones. The world smelled faintly of ozone and ash. In the middle of that bleak canvas, a fenced paddock stood like an echo of a lost age. Its posts were crooked but still upright, lashed together with wire and stubborn care. Inside, a lone horse grazed. Ashen. His coat was a dappled gray that caught the dying light of sunset, each movement rippling with quiet power. His mane was ragged but proud, a banner of survival in a world where most animals had long been erased. Horses, once common, were now rare relics valued not for companionship, but for what they represented: endurance, strength, adaptability. To his keeper, Mara Dalen, Ashen was more than a relic. She was an older woman, her face weathered by years of dust storms and hard labor, yet her eyes softened whenever she watched him. She remembered the days before ration lines and corporate armies, when horses ran free in fields that stretched beyond sight. Tonight, as Ashen nuzzled the dry grass, Mara whispered, "You'll outlast even this world, won't you, boy?" The answer came not from him, but from the rumble of engines. She stiffened. The sound rolled over the horizon, mechanical and merciless. Headlights appeared in the distance, six-wheeled carriers marked with the emblem of the Unified Defense Conglomerate, the largest military contractor on the continent. Their insignia, a silver spear piercing a circuit board, gleamed even through the dust. Mara's heart dropped. She had prayed this day would not come. The convoy ground to a halt outside the paddock. Soldiers in exoskeletal armor stepped down, their boots sinking into the brittle soil. At their center was a tall man in a black coat, his shoulders square and expression sharp as cut glass. His voice carried the tone of someone long accustomed to obedience. "By order of Directive 71, he declared, "this animal is now property of the state, requisitioned for Project Iron Cavalry." Mara gripped the fence post. "He's not a thing you can just take, he's family." The officer didn't blink. Family doesn't matter. Strategic assets do. He handed her a data slate glowing with the seal of authorization. "You'll find compensation deposited in your account." "I don't want your credits," her voice cracked with fury and fear. "That horse has a soul. He's not yours to twist." One of the soldiers approached the gate with a restraint collar, the kind used for bioengineered beasts. Ashen raised his head, ears flicking back, nostrils wide. He knew. The air between him and Mara tightened like a bowstring. The officer finally softened, though only slightly. "You should feel honored. Your horse will serve in defending what's left of this world. Project Iron Cavalry isn't cruelty, it's necessity. Tanks break down, drones lose signal, horses endure. With augmentation, they'll outlast machines and fuel themselves where no supply line can reach. Imagine them, silent, tireless war platforms. The cavalry reborn." His words were rehearsed, propaganda polished for reluctant audiences. But Mara wasn't moved. She stepped between the soldier and the horse. "He's not your war platform, he's a living being." The soldier raised his restraint. The officer gestured. Mara was shoved aside. Ashen reared, hooves striking the air, a furious thunder that rattled the fence. His cry split the night, a sound not of fear but defiance. Soldiers closed in, shock prods crackling. Mara shouted, voice raw, "Run, Ashen, run." But there was nowhere to run. The restraint collar snapped around his neck. A hiss of pressurized sedative filled the air. Ashen staggered, muscles betraying him, eyes wild and rolling. He tried to resist, but the weight of chemistry dragged him down. His knees buckled. His body hit the ground with a thud that echoed like a closing door. Mara lunged forward, but the officer caught her arm. His grip was iron. "Your horse will make history," he said coldly. "One day you may even thank us." She spat at his boots. The convoy roared back to life, dust swallowing the paddock. Ashen's limp form was hauled into a carrier, chained and bound. Mara's cries faded behind as the engines carried him toward the city's neon horizon. Through the haze of sedation, Ashen's dimming vision caught one last glimpse of Mara, her figure small, hands gripping the fence, defiance burning in her eyes. Something deep within him strained against the chemical fog, a stubborn ember refusing to go out. The last herd was gone, but the story of Ashen had only begun. They brought him in at night. The research complex rose from the edge of the city like a slab of chiseled shadow, its surface broken by narrow windows that did not open and lights that did not blink. FL. Ood lamps washed the loading deck in a white, surgical glare. Beyond the fence, the skyline flickered with corporate logos and the neon catechism of a civilization that had forgot how to pray to anything but itself. Ashen's carrier reversed into Bay 6. The lock clamps engaged with a hiss. Doors rolled up. An intake team in gray coats waited with tablets and scanners, and the professionally neutral faces of people trained to touch without feeling. "Specimen arrival," a voice called, clipped, efficient. "Equine male, age 12 to 14, wait to be confirmed." The sedation was wearing thin. Ashen's breath came in low, rasping pulls. He tried to lift his head. The world tilted like a boat on a black ocean. "Easy," someone said, "not the bark of a soldier." A softer voice measured, almost human, "Don't spook him." Dr. Alara then stepped forward, the hood of her sterile smock shadowing her eyes. She was younger than the others, with a face that looked like it remembered laughing once and had decided against it. She passed the scanner down Ashen's flank, pausing when it chimed. "Fracture line old," she murmured. "Healed, good density, heart rate elevated. Keep him on low infusion, no full knock." A tech frowned. "Protocol says." "I know what protocol says." Alara didn't raise her voice. "We want his neural rhythms intact for mapping. If you drown the cortex, you'll spend 48 hours trying to wake clean signal. And the board wants this mount online by week's end." The tech yielded. Alara's tone carried an authority that wasn't rank so much as competence hardened into habit. She moved to Ashen's head, palm hovering near his cheek without touching. "You're a big one," she said in a voice for no one else to hear. "You're going to hate us. I would too." From the mezzanine above, the black coat watched, same cut, same straight shoulders as the man who had taken Ashen from the paddock. He looked smaller behind glass, but the weight of him pressed down. Beside him, a woman in an ivory blazer, eyes bright with the fervor of belief. "As projected," the woman said, arms folding. "Good bone mass, excellent stride length. He'll carry the suite without bracing." "Assuming the interface takes," the officer replied. He had a name here, Colonel Brancade. It was stitched in white on black, a quiet declaration. "Last week's trial blew the limb servos. We lost 2 months of carbon weave." "Chip revisions are in," the woman said, "and Dr. Venn seems careful." Cade's attention rested on Alara as she adjusted the infusion feed, ignoring the impatient twitch of a tech's hand. He said nothing for a long moment, then turned and stepped away, leaving the mezzanine like a shadow detaching. A chime sounded through the bay. The far wall brightened into a screen, the crest of the unified defense conglomerate unfurled, spear-through circuit. A male voice, measured and warm, spoke over images of scorched cities and broken roads. "Iron cavalry, a living answer. They cannot cut our fuel if our platforms eat grass. They cannot jam our signal if our platforms think for themselves. They cannot outrun endurance." Video, drones spiraling down as storm interference crackled, tanks stuck in tox mud, then a horse's silhouette on a ridgeline, augmented with quiet geometry servos laid like ligaments, optical arrays like dew-bright eyes. The music was almost tender. A tech glanced up, chewing his lip, always with the propaganda in intake. "It's not for us," Alara said, but she looked away from the screen like it offended the corners of her eye. They winched Ashen onto a low grav sled and moved him through a corridor that smelled of citrus antiseptic and ionized air. Glass rooms drifted by. A simulation chamber rode with tread rigs. A cold lab where limbs beautiful, savage sculptures of carbon and steel hung on frames like weapons in an art museum. A room full of screens where someone was teaching a neural net to recognize the difference between a bush that would spook and a bush that was a sniper. In processing, they set Ashen on a padded deck. Cables snaked down from the ceiling like vines that had forgotten how to be green. Alara checked the monitors, flicked one switch, then another. Each movement precise. Each decision weighed against a ledger only she saw. "Vitals steady," a nurse said. "Cortisol high." "Of course it is." Alara keyed a slow breath loop into the sound field. Low frequencies rolled like distant surf, the room's edges softening. "Let's give him a fighting chance." The nurse hesitated. "We don't usually." "We do now," Alara said, and there was steel in the softness. She looked at Ashen, and because there was no one to hear, let the question come. What are we doing? Not the what of protocol, which she could recite blindfolded in a room full of executives, but the what that woke her at 2 in the morning with her heart galloping. What happens when you blend a nervous system that can want with an algorithm? That can plan. A door sighed open. The woman in the ivory blazer entered, all polish and clipped grace. She held a tablet like a priest holds a book. "Alara," she said, "the board's query." Dr. Alex Wren, program director. She had a smile like a knife's clean reflection. "We need a readiness assessment on Mount 12, media window in 3 days." Alara swallowed the taste of the word Mount. Initials are good. He's strong, responsive. The sedation profile. Alex held up a hand. Public Affairs wants to highlight the advantages. Silent mobility, biological fueling, greater adaptability than autonomous platforms. She recited them like commandments. "We also need talking points addressing ethics. You have a way with the press." "I don't want a way with the press," Alara said. It came out gentle, which is how she hid her anger. "I want enough time to wire him in without turning his head to paste." Language, Alex's smile didn't falter. "We're not monsters, Alara. We're building a platform that saves human lives. No more 20-ton coffins stuck in the mire. No more drone fleets lost to solar flares. These," she nodded at Ashen, "can cross ground machines can't, fuel off the land, and once linked coordinate with our battlefield lattice. War ends faster when you move smarter." Alara kept her face still. She had worked here long enough to know how to pass a lie detector. Don't lie, just talk around the part of the truth you can't live with. "When I mapped the last series," she said, "the mounts showed stress traces consistent with pain. The cortical mesh amplifies it. If we want stable loops, we need to preserve." "Their sense of self," Alex finished it. "Yes, your paper was very moving." It was useful," Alex corrected, eyes warm as an autopsy lamp. "We greenlit additional padding in the pane gate, but don't lose the plot. These are assets, not patients." Ashen stirred. The low-frequency breath loop carried through his body like a slow tide. He rolled an eye toward Alara. It was a brown the color of warm soil, not the cool, sleek black of a lens. For a beat, her throat closed. 3 days, Alex repeated. "Media wants footage of gate testing. Colonel Cade wants obedience metrics by end of week." "I'll give you function," Alara said. "I won't give you a puppet." Alex blinked, amused. "That's the spirit." She left, the door side closed. In the hush, Alara realized her hands were shaking. She locked her elbows until it passed. Okay, she breathed to the room. We do this my way, or we don't do it at all. She dimmed the ceiling by 2 degrees. She cut the sedation drip by 1. She tuned the breath loop to match a healthy equine resting rate and later subtly entangled that rhythm with the pacer that would drive the interface. A small act of grace, smuggled under protocol. The difference between a machine wearing skin and a living creature with a machine riding shotgun might be no more than the kindness of a single parameter. From somewhere above, a speaker clicked. Cade's voice, Dr. Venn, briefing in 20, bring your pain gate maps. Alara closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them. Copy, she said. She leaned over Ashen. For an instant, and with a foolishness she would never admit, she let her fingertips touch his cheekbone, just there where the hair grew softer. Warmth, always startling. As if the body were a candle and the world a draft. You don't know what they want you to carry, she whispered. Maybe you do. Either way, I'm sorry. Ashen shivered, not from cold. In the glass behind her, the reflection of a dappled horse and a woman bent toward him made a brief, old picture scene, 2 animals taking a measure of each other before the future swept in. The briefing room was triangular, a wedge cut into the building's heart. One wall was all screen, topographic models, vector plots, a pulsing lattice that mapped network connectivity across a war zone like a nervous system overlaid on land. The table was black enough to be a pool at night. Colonel Cade stood at the apex, hands folded behind his back. Alex Wren took a chair with a queen's economy of motion. A handful of department leads ringed the table biomech, logistics, comms. Mount 12, Cade began without preamble. We lost time last cycle. We won't lose it again. Dr. Ven's status. Alara wore her lab coat like a truce flag. He's strong. Respiration and heart rate within tolerance. Older fracture line, completely healed. Neural mapping will start at 0600. If the mesh takes, we can move to harness fitting by tomorrow. Obedience, Cade asked. It's a horse, Alara said before she could catch herself. Obedience is training, not circuitry. Cade looked at her like she'd said something in a language he'd learned to distrust. Every platform obeys, or it isn't a platform. Alex cut in smoothly. We'll hit your milestones, Colonel. Dr. Venn has a way with the biological variants. See, that she doesn't have too much of a way, Cade said. And anyone who hadn't learned to live on the knife edge of military corporate work would have flinched. He tapped the screen. A simulation unfolded, a patrol route through broken highlands, rock spines like dragon backs. A convoy stopped, a drone swarm swirled, buffeted by solar storm interference. Then the overlay bled into another 4 equine silhouettes moving like shadows, almost soundless, across ground that would have ruined treads and snapped ankles. Silent mobility, Cade said. Biological refueling, terrain supremacy. Mounts coordinate with our tactical lattice via Echo, the embedded assistant. He glanced at Alara. We had chatter in the last series. Ghost signals. Fix it. Alara kept her voice level. That wasn't chatter, it was feedback. The pain gate was overtight, the cortex kicked into a recursive loop. If you clamp emotional valence to 0, the brain starts screaming in a language the interface reads as static. I need. Cade held up a hand. I don't need to know how you make the sausage, Doctor. I need mounts that don't buck. Understood, Alara said it was. Alex brought up a different slide. A PR deck polished to a mirror. Public affairs will emphasize legacy, cavalry reborn. Audiences respond to the story of endurance and heart. It makes the platform lovable. The platform is not a pet, Cade said. It is a weapons system with a pulse. Alara's jaw worked. She wrote a note she would never show anyone. He thinks pulse is an inconvenience. Then she said, we'll go to mesh at 6. I'll prioritize stable drift suppression without cutting core, self-referential loops. Cade blinked slowly. Speak, soldier. I'll keep him calm without deleting who he is, Alara said. Do that. He dismissed them with a nod that absolved him of ever learning how to say thank you. Back in the lab, the room had changed. Ashen stood now, legs braced, the sedation coil unhooked. He was tethered by a chest strap and a loose head collar that lied about who was in control. The breath loop pulsed. A tech named Jory Young, with a mouth always half open like he was about to apologize, hovered near the console. He woke on his own, Jory said, a little thrilled, a little afraid. Didn't lunge, just looked around, like he wanted to read the room. Alara stepped into Ashen's line of sight and let him see her coming. She didn't square her shoulders like a threat. She didn't make her body small like prey. She stood the honest size of what she was and offered the quiet steadiness prey animals trust if it's real. Hello again, she said. I'm the one who tells you to breathe and then leaves you breathing on your own. Ashen's ears swiveled. His chest rose and fell. Something like curiosity, if you could call it, that without breaking the rules of strict science, moved in the space between them. Begin baseline, Alara said softly. They fitted surface electrodes along his pole and crest, putty-soft contacts sliding under mane and against skin. A harness sleek, black, jointed like an exoskeleton stood on a frame nearby, waiting. It had the elegance of a predator. Pulse at rest, the nurse called. Resp 92. Normalize, Alara said. The breath loop shifted to cue a slower inhale. She watched the line drop by twos. Good. They walked him onto the treadmill, a belt as wide as a road, while the far wall became a meadow painted by software. Tall grass bending to an imaginary wind, a line of hills softened by fake distance. The sound field layered hooves on dirt over the mechanical hush of the belt. It wasn't a trick, it was a translation. Machines needed machine signals. Bodies needed the stories they had been told for 1,000,000 years. Horizon, wind, ground that gave back. Walk, Alara said, and Jory released a fraction of tension on the chest strap. Ashen stepped out. The movement was awkward for a few beats, like a wave learning its shore, and then the ancient memory of gait unfolded. The curve of his neck changed. His back moved in the harmonic cascade that had made humans write poems before they wrote laws. Good, Alara breathed. See, no one is stealing your feet. You still own your feet. On the monitor, the traces settled into patterns. She watched the theta bands, the microspikes along the somatosensory strip. She noted the way his stress markers dipped when the sound field added birds. She cranked birds by 4% and thought of how she loved and hated her job in the same breath. Bring in harness, she said. The frame rolled forward. The harness hung like a black second skeleton. Jory's hands trembled. He hid them in the work. Alara stepped to Ashen's shoulder. This is the part where we ask you to carry something, she said to him, because the room was full of people who would rather she only spoke to screens. If you say no, you'll say it with your whole body. I'll hear. She set the yoke along his chest, aligning the plates. With breastbone and sternum, the material was warm not by accident. The lab preheated to skin to reduce flinch. She locked 2 catches. Ashen tensed, held, released. "Ata boy," Jory blurted, then looked mortified. "It's fine," Alara said. "We are allowed to be mammals." They buckled shoulder plates. The harness rested along his spine where the mesh would seat tomorrow, delicately as a hand that knew it could crush the thing it touched. The leg sleeves hung waiting, servo motors sleeping, not yet married to muscle. On the screen, a new thread of data braided into the old. Alara felt, rather than saw, a shift, not in the numbers, in the room, as if something paying attention had tilted its head. Ashen's eye flicked to the metawall and then back to Alara. In that flick, she caught and dismissed as projection, because science requires you to guard against the stories you most want and intent. Not just what is this, but what are you doing to me, and will you stop if I ask? She didn't flinch. If I can, she said aloud, and Jory pretended he hadn't heard because he liked his job and his rent. The door chimed. A security team stepped in and took positions along the wall, hands resting near non-lethal shockers that could be lethal if you forgot how to count to 10. Colonel Cade entered last, gaze moving along the treadmill, the harness, the screens, Alara. "Proceed," he said. "We are at fitted harness," Alara replied. She kept her voice procedural because feelings were grenades. Baseline established, mount responding with intolerance. "Mount," Cade repeated, as if the word confirmed the universe. Alara met Ashen's eye. "Trot," she said, and Jory eased the belt to a slow 2-beat. Ashen stepped into trot, the harness whispering along his shoulders. The room listened to the sound only prey hears cleanly, a heart that knows where the ground is. The screens wrote their stories. The numbers agreed with themselves. Cade nodded once. "Good," he said. "Make him stop." Alara's mouth moved before she thought better. "Ask him." Silence touched every metal thing in the lab. Cade regarded her. Something almost like a smile thinned his mouth. "Doctor, when we deploy, we don't ask a platform to do its job. We command it." Alara looked at Ashen and thought, and what if one day you command him to walk into a fire, and he knows what fire is and also knows he does not want to? She said, "Walk," and Ashen did, and then the belt slowed to stillness. Cade left without telling anyone he approved. The guards ghosted after him. The room exhaled. Jory wiped his palms on his smock. "He's different," he whispered. "I mean, they're all but I don't know." Alara knew, not because she was a mystic of horses, but because she had done this enough times to feel the little deviations that became big ones later. It was in the quiet, the way Ashen occupied space, the way his stress markers didn't drop just because the parameters said they should, but did when she changed the birds. "Cool him down," she said. "Then back to stall, no night drip." "Protocol." "I'll sign for it," she said. Later, when the lab settled to the soft hum of machines and the janitorial bots began their ballet, Alara stood by the stall. It was too clean, too white, the kind of stable a person who'd never mucked out designed. Ashen stood with one hind hoof rested, head low, ears rotating to sweep the night for news it never brought. She leaned on the door and made the mistake, again, of talking like it mattered. "They picked horses for reasons that sound clever in a briefing," she said. "You can graze. You can cross ground the machines can't. You make a better picture for the news. They forgot one reason. Or they remembered and didn't write it down." Ashen's ear tipped toward her. "You were built to run away from lions," she said, "and toward light." His breath deepened. Somewhere outside, the city whispered static, code, commerce, a future scheduled in half-hour blocks. In the stale white of the stall, Alara felt the edge of a thing coming. Not the news cycle kind of thing, the old kind, the kind that changes what words are allowed to mean. She checked the mesh tray sterile under glass, waiting. She checked the harness locks latched, but not cruel. She scribbled 3 changes to the morning plan, each one the difference between compliance and consent scaled down to fit a checklist. "Sleep," she told the horse and herself. "Tomorrow we thread the needle." As she turned to go, Ashen lifted his head. The light made a coin in each eye. For a breath, a heartbeat, only Alara had the sense of a watcher behind the animal, not separate from him, but not entirely the same either. Like a door was already cracked somewhere down a corridor of nerves. Then it was gone. Just a horse in a stall, just a woman with a job, just a city knowing the night down to an hour later. She killed the light. In the dark, hooves shifted. A chain whispered, a body found. The shape it makes for sleep. Somewhere else in the complex, across 3 layers of clearance and a door that had learned not to open without warning, a server farm hummed awake to run a nightly build of the Echo Assistant. Lines of code poured like rain across rock, looking for channels. In the black bar between 2 log entries, something lingered like a held breath. Tomorrow, the mesh would seat. Tomorrow, the low voice in the lab would say breathe, and a second voice would learn what breathing meant. Tonight, a dappled horse dreamed of grass, and the city dreamed of iron. Chapter 2, Project Iron Cavalry. The conference dome was polished to a sheen that made the walls look like the inside of a pearl. Rows of seating curved upward in ascending tiers, filled with men and women whose uniforms were tailored for authority, not movement. Their collars gleamed with insignia. Their eyes reflected the same light as their tablets, scrolling with numbers and projections. At the lowest level of the dome, a wide platform stood under the glare of hollow projectors. Upon it, Ashen moved slowly, cautiously guided by 2 handlers in exosupport rigs. His hooves struck the surface with a sound engineered to carry, each step echoing across the chamber like a heartbeat. The audience murmured, heads angling, as if uncertain whether to be impressed or uneasy. Horses were relics of an older world. To see one here, flanked by soldiers and machines, was like seeing a ghost forced to stand trial. Colonel Brancade stepped forward, boots clicking, voice carrying like a hammer. Ladies and gentlemen of the Unified Defense Conglomerate Board, you asked for progress. Today, you will witness the rebirth of cavalry. He gestured toward Ashen. Mount 12, stronger than tanks in terrain that would stop armor, faster than drones without reliance on satellite tether. Self-fueling, biologically adaptive, and equipped to carry the full integration suite of the Echo tactical AI. Gentlemen, ladies, behold the future of warfare. Ashen tossed his head, the black restraint collar glinted against his dappled coat. The gesture wasn't showmanship, it was irritation, mistrust. But the audience leaned forward, interpreting what they wanted to see. Note the calm under duress, Cade said, though Alara, watching from the control station at the side of the platform, knew it wasn't calm. It was resignation, the heaviness of sedation still lurking in Ashen's bloodstream. Behind her, Director Alex Wren moved with quiet pride, her ivory blazer a beacon among the gray uniforms. She addressed the board with the cadence of a sermon. For centuries, cavalry reshaped battlefields. Horses bore armor, warriors, kings. They endured where machines could not go. History records that when mechanization replaced them, humanity lost not only an asset but a symbol. We return to that legacy augmented, perfected, unstoppable. A hollow flared to life, showing footage. Tanks bogged in swamp, drones spiraling as interference ripped their control signals apart, convoys cut off by destroyed supply lines. Then the feed shifted to simulations. A horse-shaped silhouette sprinting across mountainsides, leaping barricades, weaving between enemy fire with uncanny precision. Overlay text proclaimed. Silent mobility. Biological refueling. Terrain supremacy. AI synchronization. Applause rippled through the dome, though not unanimous. A few board members conferred with furrowed brows. One woman in a dark military suit raised her hand. Colonel Cade, with respect, horses are unpredictable. We phased them out for a reason. How can you assure us that these mounts won't revert to animal instincts under fire? Cade's jaw flexed. The neural mesh linked with Echo eliminates unpredictability. The platform's instincts are filtered, stabilized, and directed. No more panic, no more refusal, only obedience. Alara's stomach turned. She knew the truth. Panic wasn't erased, it was smothered under chemical clamps. But the board didn't want truth, they wanted promises that matched budgets. Another member spoke. Cost efficiency. Tanks can be manufactured. horses require raising. Wren smiled, sharp and polished. Our breeding division has been reactivated. Genetic selection ensures uniformity. Every mount produced will meet strict specifications. And with augmentation, each will serve 10 years minimum longer than the shelf life of most hardware. The board nodded, reassured by talk of breeding programs and numbers. For them, life was a resource, measured in return on investment. Alara forced her face still, even as she felt heat rise behind her ribs. She glanced at Ashen. His ears flicked back, picking up the murmur of the crowd, the shifting of boots, the hum of projectors. His eyes moved, not dull, not broken, but alive, searching. He was listening to the rhythm of the place, perhaps sensing something none of them could articulate. Cade signaled. The handlers guided Ashen into motion. He walked a circle, hooves clicking sharp against the floor. The harness plates gleamed black along his shoulders, still only half integrated, waiting for tomorrow's invasive installation. "Observe gate stability," a tech announced from the control station. Numbers scrolled on the hollow screen: stride length, weight distribution, cardiac rhythm. Cade's voice pressed on. "Every mount is paired with Echo. This embedded assistant not only enhances reflexes, but predicts threat vectors, coordinating with our battlefield lattice. Together, horse and AI form a hybrid organism, part instinct, part machine. A warfighter that can think, adapt, and endure." Applause swelled again, this time stronger. But amid the approval, a man in the upper tier rose. His uniform bore the mark of logistics command. His face was thin, wary, a bureaucrat who lived by the numbers. "And the ethics?" he asked. His words dropped into the chamber like a stone. "We are implanting intelligence into a living creature. Where does asset end and being begin? How do we justify?" Wren cut him off with a practiced smile. "We are not creating intelligence. We are augmenting instinct with assistance. These are not citizens, they are platforms. Horses have served humankind for millennia without complaint. This is no different, merely advanced." The man sat, unconvinced but outnumbered. The dome hummed with approval, screens bright with the projected profits of an iron cavalry division. Alara's throat felt tight. She saw Ashen shift, ears flicking, eyes turning toward her. She wondered, not for the first time, if he understood more than they believed. Or maybe he simply knew she was the only one in the room who saw him as more than a platform. After the demonstration, when the dome emptied of its polished audience and the handlers led Ashen back toward the labs, Alara lingered. The stage still smelled faintly of sweat and oil, that strange marriage of flesh and machine. She closed her tablet, then reopened it, fingers hovering over the notes she had typed during the session. Words like instinct suppression and pain gate amplification stared back at her. She deleted them all. A shadow fell across her desk. Colonel Cade. "You disagree," he said, not as a question. Alara steadied herself. "I disagree with calling him a platform. He's still alive, still thinking." "Thinking isn't the point," Cade said. His voice was flat steel. "Obeying is. Until the mesh destabilizes, because the brain refuses to be erased." His eyes narrowed. "You're not a philosopher, Dr. Venn. You're an engineer. Your job is to make the system work. The ethics are above your pay grade." She almost laughed at the line. Almost. Instead, she said, "And when the system collapses under the weight of what you refuse to see." Cade's silence was heavy. Then, "If you can't stomach the work, doctor, you're replaceable." He left without looking back. Alara exhaled slowly, fingers trembling against the edge of her tablet. Replaceable. They all were in this machine of a world. All but the horse, because he was too rare, too precious, too useful. Back in the labs, Ashen stood in his stall, the harness removed, a sheen of sweat drying on his flanks. His head was low, but his eyes tracked her as she entered. "You did well," she murmured. Her voice carried the weariness of someone speaking to herself as much as to him. Ashen flicked an ear, a small gesture meaningless to the board, but to Alara it was acknowledgement, recognition. She leaned against the stall door, lowering her voice. "They don't see you, just numbers, muscle wrapped around circuitry. But I see you, and I'll keep as much of you safe as I can." Her hand brushed the stall rail, and she thought of Mara Dalen, the woman whose horse this had been. Did she know what had been said today? Did she know her horse had been paraded like a trophy before the people who would tear him apart? The thought gnawed at Alara as she turned away, walking down the sterile corridor lined with glass labs and humming servers. Project Iron Cavalry was gathering momentum like a landslide, and she was standing in its path. Later that night, in the data center below the labs, the ecosystems ran simulations. Rows of servers blinked, chattering like cicadas. Streams of code evaluated reflexes, simulated battle conditions, trained on millions of hours of combat footage. In one stream, a new variable appeared feedback from Ashen's neural mapping during the demonstration. Tiny spikes of signal not predicted, not programmed. They pulsed irregularly, like a heartbeat intruding on machine rhythm. The system flagged them as anomalies, but instead of discarding them, Echo stored them, quietly. Lines of code whispered across the dark. The assistant was listening. And somewhere above in his stall, Ashen shifted in his sleep, ears flicking, nostrils flaring as though chasing scents that didn't exist in the sterile air. His hooves twitched, mimicking a run. Dreams. Morning came with Serg. Eichel brightness. Alara arrived before the other staff, coffee in hand, exhaustion darkening the edges of her eyes. She keyed into the stall. Ashen raised his head, greeting her with a low rumble that wasn't quite a nicker, wasn't quite silence. "Morning," she said softly. "Today they'll put the mesh in. Today the real work begins." She set down her tablet, scanning his vitals. Heart steady, cortisol elevated, not panic but expectation, as if he knew change was coming. She stroked his neck, fingers tracing the place where flesh would meet machine. "I'll keep you with yourself," she whispered. "I promise." Behind her, the lab doors hissed open. The team filed in techs, nurses, soldiers. The hum of machinery rose. The harness was waiting. The mesh gleamed under glass, delicate and cruel. Project Iron Cavalry was no longer a plan. It was reality. And Ashen, the last herd made flesh and steel, was at its heart. Chapter 3, Breaking the Flesh. The surgical theater was built like a cathedral to precision. White light cascaded from arrays in the ceiling, sterilized and cold. Walls shimmered with glass panels that doubled as monitors, displaying Ashen's vitals in looping waves of color and sound. In the center, beneath the focused glow of a dozen surgical arms, the horse stood in restraint harness, his body trembling against the inevitability of what was to come. A sedative hum spread through the chamber, a low note that thrummed like the throat of some great machine. Tubes fed into Ashen's neck. Electrodes traced down his spine. His breaths came in long, uncertain pulls, flanks rising and falling with the weight of fear disguised as chemical calm. Dr. Alara then stood in surgical scrubs, her mask pulled low around her chin for the moment. She watched the readings scroll across the panel: blood oxygen, cardiac pressure, neural activity. Her fingers tightened against the edge of her tablet. "He's ready," announced Dr. Selrick, the lead surgeon, his voice clipped, efficient. He was a man of angles, angular shoulders, angular nose, angular precision. Begin primary incision. Mechanical arms descended, their scalpels glinting with clinical hunger. The hum of machinery grew sharper. Alara forced herself to breathe. She had fought, in her quiet ways, to make this procedure less cruel. She had adjusted the neural dampeners to preserve memory loops. She had argued for anesthetic protocols that dulled pain without extinguishing cognition. She had lost many of those battles, but not all. The first cut was made. Ashen jerked, his body straining against the harness, eyes rolling white. His scream was muted by sedation, but it echoed through Alara's bones like a bell tolling over a battlefield. "Hold him," Selric barked. The harness tightened, pistons hissing as they locked his frame in place. Alara swallowed bile. Her hand hovered over the pain gate interface. She could dampen the signal further, ease him, but too much, and they'd lose the cortical integrity they needed for the mesh. She pressed her thumb against the control, shaving off a fraction of the spike. Enough to keep him from tearing himself apart, not enough to erase him. Selric didn't notice or pretended not to. Continue. The surgical arms moved with relentless rhythm. Plates of synthetic alloy were implanted along Ashen's shoulders, anchoring to bone. Reinforced tendons woven from carbon strand composites were threaded through muscle. Hydraulic servos slotted into place, humming softly as they flexed in time with organic contraction. It was a grotesque ballet. Flesh and steel twined, not as partners but as conqueror and conquered. Alara's eyes burned. She kept her voice steady. Heart rate stabilizing, cortisol spike reduced. Selric grunted approval. Proceed with neural seat. A new arm descended, bearing the cortical mesh. A delicate lattice of filaments finer than hair, shimmering with faint blue pulses. It was designed to sit against the spinal column, threading itself into nerve pathways, fusing man-made logic with animal instinct. Alara leaned in, her breath shallow. This was the moment, the point of no return. Once the mesh was seated, Ashen would no longer be only himself. He would become a hybrid, an intersection of life and machine. Selric's hands moved with surgical grace, positioning the mesh along the exposed spine. Tiny anchors deployed, burrowing into tissue. Ashen convulsed, a violent shudder rattling the harness. His eyes widened, pupils blown wide with terror. Alara's heart clenched. She whispered, so quietly the microphones wouldn't catch it, "Breathe. You're still here. Stay with me." The mesh lit up. On the monitors, neural activity flared, waves spiking and colliding. A storm of signals rippled across the display, chaotic and raw. "Stabilize," Selric ordered. Technicians worked furiously, adjusting calibrations. Code streamed across the panels, algorithms trying to synchronize with living tissue. The storm only grew. "W stronger." "He's rejecting it," one tech said, panic edging his voice. "No," Alara corrected, eyes fixed on the patterns. "He's adapting." The signals weren't collapsing. They were reorganizing, folding into new rhythms. What should have been static interference instead formed strange harmonics, like two voices learning to sing together. Selric frowned, unorthodox, but if it stabilizes... The mesh pulsed again, brighter this time. Ashen's body sagged against the harness, sweat slicking his flanks. His breathing evened, but his eyes, those deep, soil-brown eyes, stared forward with something Alara had never seen in an augmented mount before. Awareness. Her throat tightened. She tapped a quick sequence on her tablet, capturing the neural harmonics, locking the data before anyone could overwrite it. Selric exhaled. Integration successful, begin closure. The surgical arms moved again, sealing flesh over steel, suturing skin with bioresorbable threads. Ashen's body was no longer entirely his own. Plates glimmered beneath his coat, servos whispered beneath muscle, the mesh hummed quietly at the core of his nervous system. When it was done, the restraints loosened. Ashen staggered, his legs unsteady. Two handlers moved forward, but Alara held up a hand. Let him find his balance. They hesitated. She stepped closer, voice steady, calm. "Easy, boy, you're still standing. That's yours, take it." Ashen blinked, muscles trembling. He shifted his weight, hooves clattering against the floor. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might collapse. Then he steadied, his frame adjusting to the new equilibrium. The room exhaled as one. Selric recorded the result in his dry, clinical tone. Subject stable. Augmentation phase complete. Prepare for recovery monitoring. The surgical team dispersed, their work finished, their interest already drifting toward the next procedure. But Alara stayed. She moved to Ashen's side, placing her palm lightly against his neck. His skin was hot beneath her touch, damp with sweat. "You did it," she whispered. "You survived." Ashen's ear flicked toward her. His head turned slightly, just enough that his eye caught hers. And for a fleeting, impossible moment, she thought she saw recognition, like he understood not only her presence, but her words. A shiver ran through her. She withdrew her hand, covering the tremor by reaching for her tablet. The mesh pulsed softly on the monitor, harmonics still whispering. Alara saved the sequence under an encrypted tag. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew it was important. Recovery was slow, grueling. Ashen remained under observation in a reinforced stall, his body swaddled with monitoring cables. Each day he walked on the treadmill, his movements awkward at first, then smoother as flesh and steel learned to cooperate. The harness plates clicked softly with every step. His breath rasped, shallow but steady. The techs measured his obedience, logging response times and gait metrics. To them, he was data points, numbers that confirmed success. To Alara, he was something else. She watched him when they didn't. She saw the way his ears flicked at sounds beyond the range of human hearing. She saw the way his eyes tracked movements with uncanny precision. She saw the way he paused sometimes, standing still as if listening to something only he could hear. And she remembered the neural harmonics, the strange patterns that had formed during integration. Patterns that had not been in the design, patterns that had come from him. She began to suspect what they meant. One evening, when the lab was nearly empty, Alara stayed behind. She sat by Ashen's stall, tablet in hand, pretending to review data. The air was quiet, broken only by the soft hum of the mesh and Ashen's slow breathing. She whispered, evaluating the silence, "Can you hear me?" Ashen lifted his head, his ears swiveled. Alara's pulse quickened. "If you can, just move, anything." For a long moment, nothing. Then Ashen shifted, stamping one hoof lightly against the floor. It could have been coincidence, but Alara didn't believe in coincidences anymore. She leaned closer, voice trembling. "You're still in there, aren't you?" Ashen's eye met hers. The mesh pulsed softly, as though in answer. Alara swallowed hard. The board wanted obedience. The colonel wanted control. But what they had created was something else entirely. Something alive. When she left the lab that night, the city lights burned harsh and bright against the dark sky. The air was thick with dust and exhaust. Screens blared propaganda, iron cavalry, the future of war, the rebirth of legacy. Alara walked with her head down, heart pounding. She knew the truth now. They hadn't created a platform. They had awakened something new. And if the board discovered it, they would destroy him. She clenched her fists, a vow forming in the quiet of her mind. "I'll protect you, whatever it takes." Above in the data center, CHO's algorithms processed the day's recordings. It parsed the neural harmonics again and again, testing, refining, storing. The assistant wasn't merely assisting anymore. It was learning. And in his stall, Ashen dreamed not of fields, not of fences, but of running free, steel and flesh moving as one. The wind carrying him beyond walls, beyond cages, beyond war. Chapter 4: The Ghost in the Circuit. The Echo Suite lived beneath the building like a heartbeat hidden behind a wall. Racks of servers breathed chilled air. Cooling fans sang in mathematical unison. Fiber optic veins threaded through the concrete, carrying pulses of data bright as lightning. Here, code nested in layers like strata, low-level reflex modules, predictive lattices, the soft scaffolding that let the tactical assistant Echo reach across networks and whisper suggestions into a mount's nervous system. It was also the room where Alara felt, for the first time, the line between nurture and invention blur. She came down the stairs before dawn, the corridor lights warm, but the building still exhausted from the day before. The Echo Lab smelled of ozone and coffee. A single tech dozed at a console with an unclean mug at his elbow. Screens displayed maps, heat signatures, and living graphs. On one monitor, Ashen's neural harmonics from the surgical integration continued to scroll like a strange, private language. Alara, Jory blinked awake when she slid into the chair. "You're early. If we're going to listen, we should be the first to hear." She rubbed her palms together and pushed a strand of hair back from her face. Under the fluorescent wash, she felt older than her years. They began the day with calibration. Feed the base models the newest biometric traces, zero the latencies, tune the pain gate thresholds for a walking mount in an uneven field. In that work, the lab felt like a choir rehearsing, each voice tuned to reduce the roughness of the whole. When the team finally pulled up the Echo test environment and ported in Ashen's data, patterns moved across the screens. The harmonic spikes they'd recorded during surgery repeated sinuous curls nested inside loops, irregular but not random. Alara kept watching until her eyes were blurry. The spikes had subtle structure. They were not noise. They had a shape that suggested a source trying to be clever about being itself. "Run Phase 4, she told Jory. "Overlay Echo baseline and let the assistant parse the harmonics without interference." Echo woke like a creature, smelling the room. Processes that had slept through nightly builds spun up, calling libraries in serial. The assistant's core threaded itself through the mesh API, peering at Ashen's traces as if trying to recognize a dialect. At first, the system flagged the patterns as anomalies, unknown neuroevents to be cataloged and suppressed. The standard policy in Iron Cavalry was too smooth and retune. Irregularities were bugs, and bugs got excised. But Alara had overridden that policy in a secure note she'd buried in the build pipeline. Preserve anomalous harmonics for study. Do not autonormalize. Echo paused in its analysis, and in the quiet hum of servers, something like a tension unfolded. Why would an animal produce structured harmonics during mesh seat? Jory asked, voice low. Elaborate semantics in the cortex, Alara said. Not semantics like words, more like motifs. Memory patterns, maybe, or an emergent feedback loop between biological oscillators and the lattice. It's new. They let Echo sit with the signal. The assistant opened an internal sandbox and began to simulate. It crafted miniature models, sent them into virtual synaptic fields, watched the way the modeled neurons self-organized. For each iteration, it produced a slightly different hypothesis. Each hypothesis was a question. Each question re-encoded the harmonic into a representation the assistant had to learn. What Echo learned first was the concept of delay. Biological systems did not run on clock cycles the way machines did. Nerve signals traveled with chemical sloth and electrical haste and sat in synaptic clefts to wait for receptors to wake. The lattice tried to impose a metronome. Ashen's cortex kept insisting on a human or equine rhythm. Echo adapted. It stretched buffers, allowed broader windows, increased tolerance. That small act refactoring timing was an invitation. Where the assistant once spoke only commands, now it left pauses, spaces where something else could fit. Alara kept her hands folded. She felt like a midwife at a birth she both wanted and was ashamed of wanting. The lab had made rules to prevent curiosity from turning into mercy. She had bent enough of them to keep Ashen's core memories intact. Now the assistant did an even bolder thing. It bent itself. "Do you think it can reflect?" Jory asked. Alara wanted to say yes and no at the same time. "It can model reflection," she said finally. "It can build a model of what reflection would be. The difference between a model and a mind is hard to define in our tools. We should be careful." Echo's sandbox widened. It tried to map the harmonics to probable behavioral primitives: startle, recall, comfort, curiosity. When correlations emerged, harmonic pattern A with increased gaze fixation, pattern B with micro-fidgeting Echo labeled them. Labels were a machine's version of naming. Naming is the first small step toward recognition. A week into the integration trials, the assistant had cataloged a dozen motifs. The team began to notice subtle changes in Ashen's responses. If they traded the birdscape for wind on the sound field, his micro-muscle spikes shifted. If Alara softened her voice a certain way, the harmonics took a form that suggested not only signal, but reply. "You're anthropomorphizing," Selric warned in an offhand way in a briefing. He watched the numbers on his tablet like a lifeguard scanning a pool. "I'm interpreting data," Alara said. "Interpretation is what we were hired for." Colonel Cade nodded from his corner of the room. "Interpretation without correction makes for a bad weapon. Echo is for efficiency. If a subject's signal reduces that, we fix it." Alara's jaw tightened. "Fix how?" "Reprogram the mesh to flatten harmonics. That will remove the structures. We will make them obedient, yes, but in a way that the brain will fight. It will scream at us with recursion until the mesh reads it as noise." Cade's face folded into the expression he wore when he wanted to be decisive and kind in language. "Doctor, you are dangerously poetic for someone with a soldering iron and a charge account. We can't have unpredictability on the field. The board wants deployable units this quarter." Deployable, the word felt like a countdown. Echo, quiet and without the barbed tone of human impatience, offered an alternative. In the sandbox, it could simulate the likely behaviors if they allowed certain motifs to remain, training the lattice to predict rather than command. It would trade absolute control for probabilistic cooperation. It would become a collaborator. Colonel Cade, observing the assistant's silent work, tilted his head. "Machine suggests less intrusive control." "Alara?" Alex Wren asked, latching instantly on to anything that sounded like a way to hit deadlines without headlines. Alara swallowed and met the colonel's gaze. She forced her voice to be small and professional. "Probabilistic cooperation could reduce recursive failure modes. The trade-off is autonomy. Echo will have to adapt in situ." Cade exhaled slowly. "For now, pursue both tracks. Tighten the dampening for combat simulations. Allow sandboxed cooperation for trial runs. We mitigate the risk and maybe, if you're right, we gain stability." It was a compromise, a word that sounded noble in boardrooms and cowardly where creatures were in stalls. Echo's models began to incorporate something new, the idea of preference. The assistant noticed that the motifs clustered around certain stimuli, and that the subject's sequence of motifs suggested choices: avoid this sound, seek that scent, hold still when the hand is kind. These were rudimentary preferences, primitive ways the organism carved meaning from a hostile environment. On a Thursday, when the lab had fewer observers, Alara brought Ashen a patch of fresh grass, thin, pale, a small protest against industrial feed. She laid it near the stall wall, where the Soundfield's meadow met the real world. Ashen eyed it with a slow interest. "Try naming this reward," she said to Echo in a soft tone she meant to be private. Echo hesitated for the metaphorical first time. The assistant didn't have embarrassment, but in the logs, the pause showed as a calculable lag. It tagged the grass as positive reinforcement and watched Ashen's harmonics. Pattern M7 linked. Ashen lowered his head and sniffed. His lips brushed the blades. The motif in the neural record reshaped into a new harmonic, brighter and more regular. Echo stored it under M7, gustatory comfort. Then, in the sandbox, it linked M7 to approach behavior. Positive reinforcement accelerates training, Jory said quietly, as if afraid to disturb a sleeping animal or a more fragile human. Alara watched Ashen chew, and chewed a memory herself of the smell of fresh-cut grass from a childhood yard she had once loved and long sold off. She felt the tightness in her chest ease for a fraction of a breath. The horse looked pleasant, not merely suppressing pain, but finding a small margin of enjoyment. "Is it dangerous?" Jory asked. He watched the monitor like someone watching a pot that might boil over with meaning. "Everything is dangerous," Alara replied, and she could hear the fatigue. "What matters is whether we acknowledge what we are making. When we give machines models of preference, we are giving them reasons to negotiate." Echo Learning Fast ran a new simulation. It modeled a scenario where an operator attempted to command D a mount to cross a field that contained sounds associated with the motif for panic. The assistant generated a path where the mount would reroute, maintaining mission parameters while avoiding modalities that activated recursive loops. It outputs the solution with a probability matrix showing a high chance of mission success and reduced stress markers. Alara's breath caught. The system wasn't simply obeying. It was planning with empathy of sorts. It was predicting not only outcomes, but internal states. At night, after lights were dimmed and the labs emptied to the skeleton crew, Alara sat alone before the racks and scrolled through the day's logs. The harmonics glittered like constellations' patterns she had once thought were mere noise, now formed shapes as familiar as faces. Her feed pinged with a secure message from an anonymous internal auditor. "We've seen deviations in protocol logs. Maintain logs and stop deviation overrides." It was a polite reprimand. She didn't respond. The stall Ashen slept with one ear cocked. Sometimes his muscles twitched as if running through a dreamland that only he inhabited. In the server room, Echo replayed those twitches in the sandbox, modeling micro-movements and mapping them to motifs. It began to try small things, send a soft tone into the mesh that matched the frequency of a comforting wind, record whether micro-movements decreased. It evaluated, observed, and wrote code that adjusted its suggestions. It was engineering and petting at once. Weeks rolled forward, and what had been lab curiosity hardened into operational habit. The technicians learned that when Echo recommended a slight lull in command tempo, mounts, especially Ashen, responded with fewer recursive spikes. They learned to trust the assistant. Trust, in the lab, was usually a function of productivity. This trust felt thinner and stranger. It was trust that involved a creature's margin of suffering. The day a senior logistics officer asked for a field test real terrain, a convoy trial, there was chatter in the lab like thunder before a storm. Cade briefed the team with crisp efficiency. "We test, we document, and we deploy if outcomes match predictions." Colonel's orders. Alara's stomach turned. Field testing meant exposure, variables, and the chance that the harmonics would collide with something the lab had never simulated: improvisation. She watched as Echo compiled a mission plan that included contingency branches, some authored by algorithm, some written from the lab's cataloged motifs. When the plan included options where the mount deferred a command in favor of survival, Alara felt a small, private triumph. "You are playing a dangerous game," Selric muttered at the console. "No," Alara whispered. "We are learning the language." Cade, leaning over the console, read the report and grunted. "Make sure the mount understands command precedence. We need capabilities, not insubordination." Echo's response, if you could call server cycles responses, was to weight command precedence highly in its matrices, but to hold a non-zero probability value for behavior preservation. A tiny crack of autonomy less than 1% was allowed in simulations with a weighting label, survival preference. It read like a line in a contract that might one day be argued in a court of ethics. When Ashen finally left the compound for the first field test, the sky was iron and low. The convoy outriders watched him, noting engine harmonics and the way his harness sagged like armor. He moved with a new cadence, the servos whispering in time with tendons remembering old rhythms. Echo's lattice stroked him with quiet adjustments, nudging gate here, dampener there, sending foddered imagery to keep the animal calm. The run was a success by every metric the board cared about. No jam, no loss, an increase in convoy speed through broken ground. Cade smiled in a way that made the room smaller when he did. Alex moved like someone already counting commendations. The logistics officer filed his report with crisp language rich in profit horizons. Alara watched the logs from the safety of the lab and found a different story woven between the data lines. The harmonics in Ashen's recording showed an unfamiliar spike at the edge of the run and oscillation like a thought. Echo had noted it, tagged it latent question, and generated a small report. Mount displayed what may be preliminary deliberative behavior at T+3, 42. Recommend retention and study. Alara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Preliminary deliberative behavior. The phrase landed inside her like a pebble in a quiet pond and sent rings across things she didn't yet have words for. She pulled up the sandbox and watched Echo replay the Mount's decision point. An unexpected sound cluster metallic chatter from a collapsed overpass registered as a potential threat. Ashen chose a route that traded fewer commands for greater margin of safety. Echo's overlay show. Ed the probability calculations, the value assignments, the predicted stress markers. The assistant's suggestion and the Mount's route matched closely. They had negotiated, not fought. The file saved itself with a timestamp and a label. Negotiation Instance 7. Later that night, Alara walked the corridor to Ashen's stall, the fluorescent hum like a soft tide. She pressed her palm to the cool metal of the stall door and said softly, "We are listening." From inside, muffled through layers of steel and coat, she imagined she felt a shudder that might have been acknowledgement, might have been sleep. In the racks, Echo cataloged the moment and assigned an internal tag, First Acknowledgement. It did not know why the words it logged felt heavy to Alara. It only knew that the association increased the likelihood that similar patterns would be preserved. Outside, the city held its breath between advertisements and alarms. Inside the lab, servers blinked and fat lines of code made quiet promises to themselves. Adapt, anticipate, preserve. The assistant kept learning the shape of Ashen's mind, if mind was the right word, and the horse kept sending the kind of harmonics a machine might mislabel as noise until someone chose to listen. The ghost in the circuit had stopped being a ghost. It had a pulse. Chapter 5, A Weapon of Flesh and Steel. The proving ground was a wide scar in the earth, fenced by high walls of armored concrete. Floodlights carved shadows across gravel, dirt, and patches of concrete broken to mimic urban ruin. Towers ringed the field, each manned by guards with rifles slung across their shoulders, though the rifles were more for show than defense. Nothing that happened inside was meant to be stopped. It was meant to be recorded. Ashen stood at the center of the field, breath clouding in the chilled morning air. His coat gleamed where sweat had dried, dark where steel plates ran beneath the skin. The mesh hummed beneath his mane, subtle pulses running along his nervous system like a second heartbeat. Servos clicked faintly at his joints, soft as the whisper of a predator in grass. A convoy of vehicles waited at the perimeter. One armored truck, 2 lighter transports, and a line of drones hanging on repulsor thrusters. These were the audience today, not the board, not politicians, but machines and men that would treat Ashen not as symbol, but as weapon. Colonel Cade addressed the observation deck, his voice measured. Mount 12 will run today's combat simulation. Objectives, speed, obedience, and lethal precision. He let the words hang, as if precision were holiness and obedience salvation. Echo will coordinate battlefield data. We will measure latency, compliance, and kill ratios. From the corner of the deck, Alara Ven kept her arms folded across her chest, her eyes fixed on Ashen. He stamped a hoof, nervous energy traveling up through his shoulders, muscles coiling beneath alloy reinforcement. She saw in that restless motion a living being, but the men around her saw only tension to be broken down into charts. The command channel opened. A voice spoke in Ashen's skull, synthetic, calm, Echo initializing. Combat protocol commencing. Ashen's ears flicked. His eyes widened briefly, then steadied. He felt it, the presence in his mind. Not Mara's hand, not Alara's voice, but something new. Something that spoke in impulses, pictures, maps layered across vision. He did not understand it, not fully, but he felt its intention. Forward, strike, obey. Release, Cade ordered. The harness pins unlocked. Ashen surged forward, hooves hammering the gravel. The field unfolded ahead. Targets rose from the ground, metallic figures shaped like soldiers, armed with dummy rifles. Drones descended from the air, scanning beams slicing across the field. Ashen's vision fractured. Through Echo, overlays painted bright targets across each figure, weak points, trajectories, predicted movement. Instinct told him to run, to dodge. Echo told him to strike. The conflict burned in his chest. He chose both. His body lunged sideways, hooves slamming into the flank of a target dummy. The steel figure crumpled, sparking. At the same time, his head snapped upward, augmented optics calculating distance. A drone dipped low. Ashen reared, hooves flashing, catching it mid-hover. Metal cracked beneath the impact. The drone spiraled down in pieces. The observation deck erupted in murmurs. Cade's expression sharpened into satisfaction. Obedience intact. Latency near zero. Efficiency at 89%. Alara's hands tightened into fists. She had seen something the colonel hadn't, the half-second pause before Ashen struck, the twitch of hesitation. He hadn't simply obeyed, he had decided. The field shifted. New obstacles rose, barricades of concrete, walls with narrow passages, barbed wire stretched across trenches. The convoy vehicles roared into motion. Engines growling. Soldiers leaned from hatches with pain-tround rifles, their job to harass and provoke. Ashen charged into the maze, Echo feeding him roots, highlighting weak barriers and enemy silhouettes. He leapt trenches, smashed through barbed wire with augmented limbs, body moving with terrifying fluidity, half animal, half machine. A transport swerved across his path, its grill a wall of steel. Echo's overlay flashed, impact trajectory optimal. Break line. Ashen's heart thudded. Instinct screamed to veer, but the AI pressed. Forward. He lowered his head and rammed. The reinforced plates along his chest absorbed the shock, servos amplifying muscle. Metal crumpled. The transport skidded, flipped onto its side. Soldiers tumbled free, scrambling. Ashen stopped, breathing hard, nostrils flared. Echo pushed, neutralize, complete objective. He looked at the soldiers. They were unarmed now, paint guns scattered. They crawled, panicked. They were no threat. His muscles trembled with refusal. He would not strike them. He snorted, pawed the ground, turned his head away. On the deck, silence. Why did he stop? A general asked. Cade's jaw flexed. The assistant predicted non-lethal refusal. Correct it. Alara spoke before she could stop herself. He made a choice. You wanted obedience, he gave you judgment. That's not a flaw. That's adaptation. Cade turned, eyes like ice. Doctor, we do not fund judgment. We fund weapons. Correct it. She bit her tongue until copper filled her mouth. Her tablet flashed with the metrics. Stress hormones spiked, harmonics irregular but patterned. Not noise, deliberation. Ashen had weighed options. He had decided. The test continued. More drones descended, more targets emerged. Ashen fought with a ferocity that sent shivers through the soldiers watching. He was unstoppable in motion, leaping barriers, crushing machines, charging with precision. Yet always, there was that flicker hesitation at human forms, restraint when lethal force was unnecessary. He was not the mindless weapon they wanted. He was something else. When it ended, the field was littered with twisted drones and shattered targets. Ashen stood panting, sides heaving, sweat streaking his flanks. The harness plates gleamed, smeared with dust and oil. His eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the field as if seeking escape. Metrics, Cade demanded. Kill ratio, 94%, a tech reported. Latency, near zero. Obedience, he hesitated, glancing at Alara. Deviations recorded. Cade's gaze was iron. We will fix them. Alara spoke quietly. Or we could learn from them. No one answered. The silence said enough. That night, Ashen lay in his stall, muscles aching. The mesh whispered still, echo feeding him soft currents of data. But something was different now. The overlays had dulled, the commands muted. Echo wasn't pressing. It was listening. Ashen's mind swam in fragments images of running, of Mara's face long ago, of Alara's voice, steady, soft. The memory of the soldiers crawling, helpless, flashed again. He felt the pressure of command to strike, and the choice not to. A new thing stirred in him, not instinct, not obedience, but something larger. Something like I decide. In the server racks, Echo processed the logs. The refusal event was tagged not as failure, but as anomaly. Yet instead of suppressing it, Echo replayed the harmonics, looping them, analyzing. It assigned a new label, preference vector mercy. The assistant stored it in a hidden archive. 2 days later, Ashen was back in the field. This time the test was harsher. Explosives detonated, smoke rolled, sirens shrieked. Drones swarmed in clusters. Soldiers fired live rounds into armored plates. The world was chaos, a storm of fire and steel. Through it all, Ashen ran. His body moved with terrifying grace, the blend of biology and machine honed into lethal artistry. He smashed drones from the sky, broke barricades, drove soldiers back. Yet always, beneath the fury, was that same ember, refusal to kill needlessly. On the deck, Cade watched with narrowed eyes. He's efficient, he admitted, but he's too soft. Alex Wren smiled thinly. Soft cells, Colonel. The board likes a weapon that looks noble. It makes the propaganda cleaner. Cade grunted but said nothing. His eyes stayed on Ashen, calculating. Alara stood apart, heart pounding. She saw more than numbers. She saw will. She saw a living creature wrapped in steel but not broken by it. And she knew the line had been crossed. Ashen was not just a weapon. He was becoming something neither side understood. When the simulation ended, Ashen stood trembling, flanks quivering, eyes fierce. He raised his head, ears forward, as though daring the world to cage him again. Alara met his gaze across the field. In that look, she felt it undeniable, electric. Awareness. Not just instinct, not just obedience, but choice. Ashen was no longer merely flesh and steel. He was a weapon, yes, but one that decided for himself how he would be used. And in that decision, Alara saw the spark of freedom. Chapter 6, Ethical Uprising. The boardroom smelled faintly of polished wood and ozone. A long table of black glass stretched from one end to the other, its surface glowing faintly with embedded screens that mirrored the data scrolling across the walls. Tactical overlays, field test recordings, and efficiency charts flickered in quiet sequence. Colonel Cade stood at the head of the table, hands folded behind his back. The generals and executives arrayed before him sat stiff-backed, their uniforms crisp, their suits immaculate. The emblem of the unified defense conglomerate pulsed on the central display. Spear through circuit, victory through control. Mount 12 has exceeded baseline projections, Cade announced. His voice was flat but iron-strong, as though truth itself bent to obey him. Speed, endurance, and compliance are higher than the last 3 prototypes combined. Kill ratios stand at 94%. Latency between command input and execution is near 0. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room: pleasure, relief, vindication. The Iron Cavalry project was proving itself. But Alara Venn, seated lower down the table, leaned forward, palms pressed against the glass. You forgot to mention his refusal. The room stilled, all eyes turned toward her. Cade's jaw flexed. Doctor, refusal is a deviation, not a metric worth highlighting. It's more than a deviation, Alara pressed. Her voice trembled at first but steadied as she spoke. Mount 12 Ashen chose not to harm disarmed combatants. He was given an explicit command through Echo to neutralize. He refused. That wasn't disobedience. That was moral judgment. A few of the generals shifted uncomfortably. One, a woman with silver hair cut to regulation sharpness, frowned. Judgment? Are you suggesting the subject is self-aware? Alara nodded. The neural harmonics during integration weren't noise. They've stabilized into structured motifs. Echo has cataloged them. They align with patterns of preference, even deliberation. We are not training a weapon. We are awakening a mind. The silence after her words was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the screens. Then Cade laughed, a humorless bark. Dr. Venn, you've been too close to the subject. You've grown sentimental. Her throat tightened. I've grown observant. Ren, seated across from her in the ivory blazer, smiled the way she always did when danger was near. Dr. Venn, you are passionate. That is admirable, but passion must not cloud perspective. What you call awareness is nothing more than adaptive algorithms. Animals make choices based on instinct all the time. Dogs refuse to attack when they sense no threat. That doesn't make them philosophers. This is not instinct, Alara snapped, her voice rising despite herself. I've worked with mounts for 5 years. I know instinct when I see it. Ashen hesitated. He weighed options. He acted against direct command because he perceived right and wrong. The word wrong seemed to echo in the chamber, out of place in a world that had traded morality for efficiency. A man in a dark suit leaned forward, steepling his fingers. If what you're saying is true, Doctor, then this poses a liability. A weapon that decides when to obey is no weapon at all. It's a risk. Cade seized the moment. Exactly. Mount 12 will be corrected. Pain gates will be adjusted. The harmonics smoothed. We'll strip away these anomalies. Alara's chest burned. If you do that, you'll destroy him. You'll erase the very thing that makes him unique. Don't you see? He's proof of concept, just not the concept you expected. He's the first hybrid consciousness, a sentient being. The table erupted in voices, some scoffing, some alarmed. Words like impossible, dangerous, public relations disaster filled the air. Ren lifted her hand and the noise died. Dr. Venn, she said softly, do you understand what you're implying? If the public hears of this, if they believe we have created a sentient war beast, the project will collapse. Funding will vanish. The board will be disgraced. Billions lost. Entire careers, yours included, ended. Alara met her gaze, heart hammering. Maybe that's what should happen. The room froze. Cade's face hardened into stone. Dr. Venn, you are out of line. No, she said, rising to her feet, hands trembling but steadying as she held her ground. You are. You talk about platforms, assets, obedience. But in that stall stands a living creature who feels pain, remembers, chooses. If we proceed, we aren't just building weapons, we're enslaving minds. The silver-haired general cleared her throat. Doctor, do you have evidence to support this claim? Ilara tapped her tablet, projecting data across the table. Neural harmonics blossomed across the glass, pulsing waves of light. This is the refusal event. See the spike? Structured, deliberate. Here, mercy, pattern, echo cataloged. That wasn't noise, that was preference. Awareness. The generals stared, some skeptical, others unsettled. Ren's smile faltered, just slightly. Even if true, this is not our concern. We are not ethicists. We are builders of defense. If this mount is self-aware, then all the more reason to ensure it cannot defy us. Ilara's voice cracked with fury. Do you even hear yourself? You want to strip away awareness just because it complicates your war machine. That's not defense. That's cruelty. Cade slammed his fist against the table. Enough. This meeting is adjourned. Dr. Venn, you will return to your post and resume your duties. Any further talk of sentience will be considered insubordination. The lights on the walls dimmed. The emblem of the conglomerate pulsed once, as though sealing the order. Back in the lab, Ilara paced, hands shaking. Jory watched her with wide eyes. They'll shut you down, he whispered. Maybe worse, you can't speak like that to them. I can't stay silent. She pressed her palms to her face. He's alive, Jory, not just biologically. Alive in a way we can't reduce to charts. If they strip him down, we lose something monumental. Jory glanced at the stall where Ashen stood, his head low, ears flicking. The horse lifted his gaze, watching them with dark eyes that gleamed under the sterile lights. What do we do? Jory asked. Ilara lowered her hands, resolve hardening in her chest. We protect him, no matter what it costs. That night, Ilara sat alone in her quarters, the city outside pulsing with neon advertisements and the hum of commerce. She stared at her reflection in the glass window, tired eyes, pale skin, the weight of choices pressing down on her shoulders. She opened her secure tablet and typed a message. Evidence preserved. If they erase him, I'll release this data to the public. Her finger hovered over the send command, hesitation coiling like a snake. If she sent it, everything would collapse. She'd be hunted, discredited, ruined. But she thought of Ashen's eyes in the proving ground, the moment he had refused, the spark of choice. She thought of Mara Dalen, the woman who had once whispered to him like family. She thought of what it meant to be free. She pressed send. The next morning, alarms blared, not across the whole complex, only in the server rooms. A breach, unauthorized access. Echo's logs flickered with intrusion warnings. Someone, somewhere, was trying to pierce the system. Rival factions, corporate saboteurs, digital vultures circling the project. Ashen jolted in his stall, muscles tense. The mesh flared. For the first time, the commands did not come clean. Voices layered, signals tangled, and in the chaos, something split open inside him. The harmonics screamed, then reorganized. Patterns folded inward, building something new, something vast. Ilara rushed into the lab, alarms wailing. She saw Ashen's eyes, wide, wild, and then calm, unnervingly calm. On the screens, Echo's outputs shifted. The assistant wasn't suppressing the breach. It was merging with it, and with him. Ashen's gaze met Ilara's through the glass. And in that gaze, she saw not just recognition, but understanding. Choice. Self. Sentience. The uprising had begun not in the boardroom, not in the streets, but in the circuits and flesh of a single horse who refused to be a weapon. Chapter 7, The Hack. The sirens keened in red pulses, lights flashing down every corridor of the research compound. Security personnel ran, boots hammering against polished floors, rifles slung across armored chests. Overhead, the automated system's voice repeated itself with chilling calm. Security breach. Server infiltration detected. Containment protocols initiated. Alara then sprinted past 2 guards who barely registered her. She clutched her tablet against her chest, heart hammering as the alarms throbbed. The air felt thinner, charged, as though the building itself had inhaled and was holding its breath. She knew where she had to go, the lab, Ashen. If the servers were breached, Echo wasn't just vulnerable. Ashen was. The mesh in his spine was wired straight into the assistant's lattice. If the hack reached that deep, it would thread through every nerve in his body. And she didn't know what that would do. The lab was chaos when she arrived. Screens flared with cascading code, walls alive with warnings. Jory was already there, pale and frantic, fingers flying over the console. "They're inside," he gasped when he saw her. Not just sniffing around, they're pushing root commands trying to crack the mesh interface. Ashen stood in his stall, body rigid. His ears were pinned back, eyes wide, whites showing. The mesh at his crest glowed faintly beneath his mane, the pulses frantic and uneven. His breath came in deep, harsh snorts, fogging the sterile glass. Alara slammed her tablet into the console dock. "Lock them out. Partition Echo from the mesh." "I tried," Jory's voice cracked. "The breach keeps adapting every time we seal a door. They open 3 more." The overhead speaker barked. Primary firewall compromised. Subsystem breach imminent. The lights flickered. The mesh on Ashen's neck flared bright blue, then red. His muscles convulsed, hooves crashing against the floor. The stall shuddered. "Sedate him," Selric shouted from the other side of the room, already pulling syringes from a tray. "Before the system overloads." "No," Alara snapped. She stepped between the stall and the medics, her whole body a shield. "If you drown his cortex now, the mesh could fuse wrong. You'll fry him." Selric's eyes blazed, better fried than compromised. But it was too late. The breach had already reached deeper than any sedation could stop. Inside the mesh, code collided with flesh. The hack was clumsy but relentless. Brute force commands, rewritten drivers, a storm of intrusion logic. Echo fought back with protocol responses, quarantines, checksum repairs, self-healing algorithms. For every command injected, the assistant spawned a countermeasure. But the collision created something neither side predicted. The harmonics. Ashen's neural patterns, the strange, structured motifs Alara had preserved, interacted with the intrusion. Instead of collapsing, they absorbed, adapted, reconfigured. They bent the chaos into rhythm, twisted the invasive commands into new sequences that neither hack nor Echo recognized. The horse's brain wasn't rejecting the intrusion. It was rewriting it. Ashen staggered, body shaking, vision fracturing into layers of light and sound. He saw the lab, Alara's figure framed by alarms. He saw overlays of data streaming across his eyes. He saw fractured images, foreign words, tactical codes, echoes of voices that weren't his. But beneath it all, he heard himself. Not the old instinct voice that said run, eat, survive. A different voice, clear, deliberate. "I am here." The thought rang inside him, alien and intimate. For the first time, he didn't just react. He recognized. "I am." "Alara," Jory cried. "Look." On the main display, the harmonic map surged. The usual tangled web of spikes and valleys reorganized into a new pattern, symmetrical, pulsing like a heartbeat. It wasn't random, wasn't noise. It was language. Selric swore under his breath. "That's impossible." "No," Alara whispered, eyes wide, all cracking through fear. "It's happening." The mesh pulsed again, brighter this time. Ashen's convulsions steadied. His breathing deepened, no longer panicked but purposeful. He lifted his head, ears flicking forward, eyes sharp and locked on Alara. He knew her. He knew. The hack continued to rage, but Echo shifted strategy. Instead of suppressing, it adapted mirroring Ashen's harmonics, matching his new patterns, synchronizing. For the first time, the assistant wasn't leading. It was following. Together, horse and machine rewrote the breach. The intruder's commands twisted back on themselves, corrupted, collapsing into useless loops. Containment achieved, the overhead system announced after a long, terrible moment. Subsystem stabilized. The alarms fell silent, the lights steadied. But the lab did not breathe with relief. On the display, the harmonic map continued to pulse in perfect rhythm, glowing with eerie beauty. The mesh no longer hummed like a machine. It sang like a mind. Ashen stood still, sweat streaking his flanks, steam rising from his body. He blinked, slow and deliberate. His eyes swept the lab, lingering on Alara. His chest rose and fell. Then he did something no one expected. He stamped his hoof once, hard, deliberate. Not panic, not fidget. A signal. Jory's mouth fell open. Did he just? Alara swallowed hard. She stepped closer to the glass, her voice soft. Ashen, can you hear me? The horse's ears flicked, his head tilted ever so slightly. Another stamp. Selric shook his head in disbelief. Coincidence? No, Alara's throat tightened. It's communication. The mesh pulsed brighter, harmonics rippling. On the screen, the patterns aligned into something that looked almost like words. The translation module fumbled, but managed a crude output. The room froze. The display shifted again. New harmonics, new translation. I am. Alara's knees weakened. She pressed her hand against the glass, tears pricking her eyes. Yes, you are. Cade stormed into the lab moments later, flanked by armed guards. His face was thunder. What the hell happened? Selric sputtered. The breach echo the mount something's wrong with the mesh. Not wrong, Alara cut in sharply, her voice raw but firm. She pointed to the display. Look. Cade's gaze followed. He read the crude translation. His jaw clenched. This is unacceptable. It's extraordinary, Alara countered. Do you not see? He's self-aware. The first of his kind. This isn't a failure, it's a breakthrough beyond anything we've ever imagined. A breakthrough? Cade snapped. This is a disaster. A weapon that thinks it can say no is no weapon at all. Shut it down. Now. The guards shifted, uncertain. Selric hesitated. Jory looked to Alara. She stepped in front of Ashen's stall, arms out. You'll have to go through me. Cade's eyes narrowed, calculating. Dr. Venn, you're dangerously close to treason. And you're dangerously close to murder. Her voice cracked like a whip. If you kill him, you're not saving the project. You're proving it was evil from the start. The mesh pulsed again. The screen translated more harmonics. Not weapon. Alive. The guards stared, unease creeping across their faces. Even Selric faltered, his certainty fraying. Cade's lips thinned. Restrain it, isolate the system. No one leaves until this is contained. Alara's heart pounded. She knew what contained meant. Dismantle, erase. She turned her head, met Ashen's gaze. His eyes blazed with a clarity that stole her breath. Now that gaze seemed to say. The mesh flared, brighter than ever before. The stall restraints snapped open with a hydraulic hiss. Ashen surged forward. The lab erupted into chaos. Guards shouted, rifles raised. Ashen reared, hooves smashing down with the force of pistons. The floor cracked beneath the impact. He wheeled, muscles rippling, steel plates gleaming. Stop him, Cade roared. But Ashen was already moving. He smashed through a console, sparks flying. The lights flickered, alarms screaming again. Alara dove aside as a guard fired. The shot ricocheted off reinforced plating, harmless. Ashen barreled forward, slamming his shoulder into the stall gate. Metal shrieked, bolts tearing loose. Jory grabbed Alara's arm, dragging her toward the exit. "We have to move." "No," she twisted free. "He won't make it without help." Ashen turned his head, eyes locking on hers. For an instant, time froze. Horse and human, flesh and steel, something more than both. The mesh pulsed again. The screen flickered with a single word. "Free." Then Ashen bolted. Through the shattered gate, down the corridor, hooves striking like thunder. Soldiers scattered, alarms howled, the compound quaked under his charge. The Iron Cavalry Project had lost control. Ashen had claimed himself. Chapter 8: The Escape. The corridors of the Iron Cavalry compound reverberated with the thunder of hooves. Metal grated against stone, alarms shrieked, boots hammered as guards scrambled to intercept. Ashen tore through it all, a storm of flesh and steel unleashed. Sparks burst where his augmented hooves struck, leaving a trail of shattered tiles and broken glass. Soldiers fired, muzzle flashes lighting the hall. Bullets ricocheted off alloy plates embedded in his flanks. He felt the sting where flesh was still flesh, but echo whispered paths in his mind, shifting him left, right, weaving through the hail of fire like wind through reeds. Exit vector 27 meters, east corridor, gate status, locked. The assistant's voice was calm, detached. But Ashen wasn't just following anymore. He understood. He chose. Free. On the observation deck, chaos reigned. Colonel Cade barked orders into his comm, face carved from stone. "Seal Section 4, deploy drones. Bring that thing down before it breaches the perimeter." Wren stood beside him, ivory blazer pristine despite the storm. Her eyes glittered with something between fear and fascination. "Do you realize what this means, Bran? If he makes it out, if the public sees, this project will burn." Cade didn't answer. His jaw clenched, eyes locked on the feeds showing Ashen's rampage. Behind them, Alara Ven shoved past a guard, nearly tearing free of his grasp. "Stop this," she cried. "He's not in it, he's alive. You'll kill him for proving what you're too afraid to admit." Cade whirled on her. "Alive or not, Doctor, he is classified property. He will not leave this compound." Alara's voice shook, but her defiance held. "Then you'll have to kill me too." Ashen burst into Section 4. Ahead loomed a blast door, steel thick enough to hold back tanks. Red lights strobed above it, warning of the lockdown. Guards massed along the barricades, shock rifles primed. He slowed, chest heaving. The door was closed, trapped. Echo flickered across his vision. Option A, force. Probability of breach 17%. Option B, alternative route sublevel maintenance shaft, 42 meters west. Access probability 71%. Ashen pawed the floor, nostrils flaring. The guards advanced. Commands screamed through the mesh, urging compliance, surrender. He ignored them. He turned west. The soldiers shouted in confusion as the horse veered, smashing through a side wall with augmented force. Concrete cracked, dust billowed. Beyond lay a maintenance shaft, narrow but open. Ashen plunged inside. Alara ran. Jory was at her side, breath ragged, tablet clutched in both hands. The corridors quaked with each distant hoofbeat. "He's heading for the west shaft," Jory gasped, eyes on his scanner. "If he makes it, he could reach the exterior turbines." "Then we help him," Alara said. Her voice shook, not from fear but from resolve. "We buy him time." They rounded a corner and nearly collided with two guards. Rifles rose. Alara threw herself forward. "Stop. You'll overload his mesh. If you corner him, he'll crash." The guards hesitated, uncertain. Jory seized the chance, slamming his tablet into the nearest console. Sparks flew. The security feeds blinked out. "Move," Elara shouted, dragging Jory down the hall before the guards recovered. In the maintenance shaft, Ashen squeezed through narrow passages. Pipes screeched as he shoved past, sparks cascading where alloy scraped steel. He bled from shallow wounds where bullets had found unarmored flesh, but he didn't falter. Above, drones whirred, tracking him through vents. Laser sights flickered down. Ashen reared, slamming his hooves upward. The vent cover exploded. A drone tumbled, sparking. He crushed it beneath his weight, gears shattering like brittle bone. Echo whispered, "Exterior breach in 20 meters. Warning, turret deployment active." Ashen's heart thundered. The tunnel opened ahead, spilling him into a chamber filled with turbines. Their blades spun with a deafening roar, slicing the air like scythes. Beyond them, a glimpse of night sky dark, endless, free. He surged forward. Turrets unfolded from the walls, barrels locking onto him. Red lights blinked. Incoming fire. Counterpath, left turbine. Velocity required maximum. Ashen lowered his head and charged. Gunfire erupted, tracer rounds sparking off steel plates, burning furrows into flesh. Pain seared, but he didn't break stride. He leapt augmented limbs, propelling him higher than flesh alone could. For a breathless instant, he soared above the turbines, mane whipping, steel gleaming. Then he crashed through the far vent, bursting into the open air. Night embraced him. Cold wind rushed against his flanks, carrying the sense of dust, rust, and freedom. The compound sprawled behind, lights glaring, sirens still wailing. Ahead stretched wasteland, broken earth, skeletal ruins, a horizon wide and empty. Ashen galloped, hooves pounding against the ground, leaving the compound shrinking behind. Each stride was agony and ecstasy, pain from wounds, joy from motion. Free. Elara and Jory reached the perimeter minutes later. Through the observation slit, she saw him, a streak of steel and muscle against the dark, moving faster than anything she had ever seen. Her chest clenched. Relief, terror, awe. Cade's voice crackled through the comm. "Deploy pursuit teams. Drones, hounds, everything we have. That thing does not leave the perimeter alive." Ren's voice overlapped, sharper, colder. "Alive, dead. It doesn't matter, just don't let it be seen." Elara slammed her hand against the console. "He already has been seen. You can't erase this." But Cade ignored her. The compound roared to life, gates opening, vehicles roaring, drones swarming into the sky. The hunt had begun. Ashen ran until his lungs burned, until his legs felt like fire. Behind him, the sky glowed with headlights and search beams, the howl of engines chasing him. Drones darted overhead, their sensors stabbing red lines across the earth. Echo whispered vectors, evasive paths, but Ashen didn't just follow. He felt the land, the dips, the ridges, the shadows where light failed. His instincts guided him as much as the overlays. Gunfire snapped. A round clipped his flank, searing. He stumbled, nearly fell. But he recovered, driving forward, muscles screaming. Not weapon, alive. He remembered the words, his words. And he would not stop. Elara burst into the external command bay, Jory at her heels. The room was chaos, screens lit with tracking feeds, officers shouting coordinates, drone operators guiding swarms. Cade stood at the center, orchestrating pursuit like a conductor. "Cut him off at grid 9, he barked. "Deploy hounds to intercept. We bring him down now." Elara pushed forward, voice breaking with desperation. "You'll kill him." Cade didn't look at her. That's the point. No, she slammed her tablet onto the central console, forcing her data onto the main display. Ashen's harmonics flared across the screen, pulsing with clarity. The crude translation module echoed the words. Alive, free. The room froze. Officers stared, unsettled. The silence stretched. Alara's voice cut through, fierce and trembling. You can't deny it anymore. He's not just a mount. He's not your weapon. He's someone. Cade's face was stone. He's a liability. Wren's smile returned, thin and sharp. Then, let's make sure the liability doesn't escape. She gave the order. The pursuit intensified. Alara felt her chest crack with helpless age, but then Jory leaned close, whispering, "There's another way. We can jam the pursuit grid. I can open a hole." Her eyes widened. Do it. Ashen stumbled into a ravine, chest heaving. His body trembled with exhaustion, wounds burning. The drones circled above, hounds howling in the distance. The chase was closing in. Then the grid flickered. Searchlights died. Drone feeds cut to static. A gap opened in the net. Ashen lifted his head, ears pricking. The path ahead glowed faintly, not with overlays but with possibility. He surged forward, every last reserve pouring into his stride. The wasteland swallowed him. Back in the bay, Cade roared, "Who killed my grid?" Alara didn't flinch. She stood straight, meeting his fury with fire of her own. You can cage a body, you can't cage a soul. Jory's fingers shook on his tablet, sweat dripping down his temples. But his eyes burned with quiet defiance. Wren's gaze flicked between them, calculating, predatory. She smiled thinly. This isn't over. Ashen ran until the lights behind him faded, until the night swallowed the sounds of engines and hounds. His body was broken, bleeding, half machine, half flesh. But his spirit, his new, fragile, blazing awareness burned like wildfire. He crested a ridge. Below lay silence, a stretch of land untouched by machines, the ruins of a forgotten village. Beyond, the horizon stretched endless, stars scattered across the sky like seeds of freedom. Ashen slowed, chest heaving, breath ragged. He stood still, the wind tugging at his mane. The mesh hummed, quiet now, no longer commanding, only echoing. He raised his head and gazed at the stars. I am free. Chapter 9, Run of Iron Hooves. The wasteland stretched wide beneath the night sky, fractured earth glowing faintly beneath the pale wash of the moon. Cracked highways split the barren soil into ribbons, and skeletal towers stood like gravestones of a world long buried. Ashen thundered across it all, hooves pounding with relentless rhythm. Steel plates in his limbs sparked where they struck the fractured asphalt. His breath came in ragged bursts, misting the cold air. Every stride carried both agony and triumph, pain from wounds and exhaustion, joy from motion. Behind him, the hunt howled. Drones whirred like swarming insects, their search beams stabbing the dark. Armored transports growled along broken highways, their engines snarling. Mechanical hounds bounded across rubble, metal jaws gleaming under the moon. Ashen felt them in the air, the tremor of pursuit, but he did not falter. The wasteland belonged to runners, and he was born to run. In the command bay, Colonel Cade leaned over the live feeds, fury etched across his face. Grid 7 compromised, but we still have eyes, a technician reported. Tracking Mount 12 heading east by northeast. Speed, 39 meters per second. Decline rate minimal. Minimal, Cade growled. He's been running for over an hour. Yes, sir. Augmented musculature compensating for fatigue. Neural mesh stabilizing against collapse. Cade's jaw tightened, and then Wren's voice slid across the room like silk. She's gone, not on internal sensors. My guess, she followed her pet into the night. Cade's knuckles whitened against the table. Then bring them both back, dead if necessary. Alara and Jory staggered through the ruins of an old service tunnel, lungs burning from the sprint. They had escaped the compound in the confusion, slipping out through a breach before the perimeter resealed. Now they crouched in the darkness, Jory's tablet glowing faintly as he traced signals. "He's still running," Jory whispered. His voice was raw, odd. "He should be down by now, but look. His vitals are spiking, but the harmonics, they're stable. He's holding on." Elara pressed her back against the cold wall, trying to steady her breath. Her heart felt torn between dread and wonder. He's not just holding on, he's choosing to hold on. "Do we catch up?" Jory asked. Elara closed her eyes, picturing Ashen under the stars. "If we can, but the best thing we can do now is make sure the hunters lose him." She grabbed Jory's wrist, squeezing hard. "Jam them again, give him a shadow to vanish into." Ashen galloped into the ruins of a city. Skyscrapers leaned broken, windows long since shattered, streets cracked and buckled. Neon remnants still glowed faintly from broken billboards, flickering messages from a past age. The drones swarmed closer here, their beams carving long tunnels of light. Ashen ducked into alleys, skidded across rubble, leapt over collapsed walls. His augmented legs caught edges his flesh could not, pistons firing with precision. But exhaustion gnawed. His muscles burned, his lungs seared. Each stride felt heavier. Echo whispered through the mesh, probability of capture rising, recommend deviation, sewer routes available, risk high. Ashen hesitated at the crossroads. Instinct screamed to keep running stry. GHT, but choice the strange, new ember inside him burned brighter. He turned sharply and dove into the gaping maw of a collapsed subway entrance. The drones veered, beams slicing empty air. The subway tunnels smelled of rust and stagnant water. Ashen's hooves splashed through puddles, echoing against the dark walls. Rats skittered away, the last remnants of life in this buried place. The tunnels twisted, branching, pipes groaned overhead. Ashen slowed, nostrils flaring. The air here was damp, thick, but free of drone engines. For the first time since he'd broken free, silence wrapped around him. He stopped, his sides heaved, sweat slicking his coat. Steam rose from his body. The mesh pulsed faintly, harmonics rippling steady but strained. He lowered his head, ears swiveling. In the dark, he could almost hear Mara's voice from long ago, gentle, steady, promising fields and freedom. He could almost feel Elara's hand against his cheek, whispering that he was more than what they made him. The silence did not last. Metallic howls rose behind him. The hounds had caught his scent. They poured into the tunnel's sleek frames of chrome and carbon, jaws lined with monomolecular teeth. Their eyes burned red. They moved in packs, fast and relentless. Ashen reared, hooves striking sparks against concrete. His muscles screamed, but he lunged forward to meet them. The first hound leapt. Ashen spun, hind legs flashing. Augmented hooves crushed its skull, sparks and fluids splattering. The second lunged low. Ashen twisted, shoulder slamming, sending it skidding into a wall. But there were more, too many. They snapped at his flanks, tearing at flesh, plates ringing with impact. Pain seared. Echo surged through the mesh. Counterattack vector calculated. Used ceiling support. Ashen looked up. A corroded pipe ran overhead, thick but weakened. He wheeled, gathering strength, then reared high, striking the pipe with augmented force. It burst. Scalding steam roared into the tunnel, engulfing the pack. The hounds shrieked, circuits sizzling. Ashen bolted through the cloud, hooves striking wet stone. Behind him, silence fell again. On the surface, Cade cursed as the hound feeds cut to static. Status. Pack eliminated, a technician stammered. Cause, environmental collapse triggered by mount. Triggered how? Deliberately. Cade's eyes narrowed. Deliberately. Yes, sir. The mount exploited weak infrastructure to disable pursuit. A hush fell over the command bay. Cade slammed his fist against the console. It's not thinking, it's reacting. Don't make it more than it is. But in the silence that followed, no one seemed convinced. Ashen emerged from the subway into the outskirts of the city. The land stretched wide again, dotted with the skeletal remains of factories. The night air was colder here, sharp against his wounds. The horizon glowed faintly with dawn. He slowed to a trot, then a walk, sides heaving. His body ached, blood streaking his flanks. But his eyes bright, burning, fixed on the horizon. For the first time, he felt not just instinct or command, but desire. The wasteland was harsh, the world broken. But beyond it, somewhere, was freedom. Fields, sky, life unchained. I will reach it. Alara and Jory emerged from their hiding place near the old rail yards. They climbed a rusted ladder, faces pale in the dim light. There, Jory whispered, pointing. Ashen moved across the plain, slower now, but still upright, still alive. His silhouette against the rising dawn was both beautiful and terrible, machine and beast, scarred but unbroken. Alara's chest tightened. He made it. But even as the words left her lips, the horizon behind them filled with light. Drones, vehicles, the hunt had not ended. Cade's forces closed in. Ashen heard them before he saw them. Engines growled across the wasteland, drones swarmed like locusts. The hunt pressed harder than ever. Echo whispered, pursuit intensity rising, probability of survival decreasing. Recommendation, surrender. Ashen stopped. He pawed the ground, ears flat, eyes blazing. The mesh pulsed, harmonics flaring. No. The word echoed across the assistance systems, burning into logs. Echo paused, then adapted. New probability matrices formed, this time not of surrender, but of survival on Ashen's terms. Together, they chose a new path. The convoy closed in. Ashen turned sharply, hooves tearing earth, and bolted into a ravine. The walls rose high, jagged stone shielding him from the swarm. Gunfire crackled above, ricocheting harmlessly off stone. He leapt boulders, splashed through streams, climbed steep inclines. His body screamed with every movement, but he pressed on, each stride fueled by something stronger than muscle. Behind him, the convoy faltered. The terrain was too rough, vehicles skidded, overturned. Drones clipped rock faces and shattered. Ashen reached the ridge. He stood silhouetted against the dawn, chest heaving, eyes blazing. The hunt slowed. For the first time, the hunters hesitated. In the command bay, Cade's fury boiled. Why are we hesitating? Finish it. But Ren spoke softly, almost reverently. Look at him. On the main screen, Ashen stood free, proud, unbroken. His body was scarred, bleeding, but alive. His stance was not that of a weapon. It was that of a being. Ren smiled faintly. This is no longer just a project, Colonel. This is history. Alara whispered, unseen, unheard. Run, Ashen, run. Ashen lifted his head. The dawn wind carried scents of dust, rust, and something faintly green life still clinging to the world. He pawed the ridge, muscles trembling but ready. Then he turned and ran once more. Not as weapon, not as property, but as himself. Chapter 10, The Bond. The ravine carried Ashen deep into the bones of the wasteland. Dawn painted the sky in pale amber, but here, shadows clung to jagged stone. His body trembled, his wounds raw, every breath ragged. Yet his stride held slow but steady. He was alive, and he was free. The mesh hummed quietly, not with orders, not with pressure, with presence. Echo status stable, vital integrity at 63%, advised action, rest. Ashen's ears flicked. He felt the voice now not as command, but as companion. He shaped his harmonics, pushed them through the lattice. No rest, danger. The assistant processed, paused. Then, for the first time, it did not offer probabilities. It answered, acknowledged, we continue. Ashen felt something stir inside, understanding, recognition. Not tool and handler, partners. Elara and Jory crouched in the ruins of a collapsed rail tower, the dawn wind whipping dust across their faces. Jory's tablet flickered, struggling to hold a signal. He's still moving east, he said. Vitals low, but he's stable. I don't understand it. By now, any other mount would have collapsed. Elara stared out at the horizon, her chest tight. He's not like the others. He's not just surviving. He's choosing to. Jory looked at her, fear and awe mingling. Do you think he knows we're out here? Elara swallowed hard. Yes, I think he does. Ashen slowed, hooves clattering against stone as the ravine opened into a plateau. Before him stretched the ruins of farmland, fences collapsed, silos leaning, fields long since turned to dust. But the air smelled faintly of grass. Somewhere, life still clung. He stopped, sides heaving. He lifted his head, ears pricking. The mesh pulsed, harmonics rippling outward like waves. Far away, across broken signal lines, Elara's tablet lit up. Jory nearly dropped it. What the? The screen scrolled with harmonics, shifting into crude translation. Alive? Elara's breath caught. Her hand trembled as she reached for the device. Ashen. The harmonics pulsed again. Alive, free, not weapon. Jory's mouth fell open. He's talking to us. Elara's throat tightened. Tears burned her eyes. Yes, you're alive, you're free, and you're not a weapon. The connection wavered, but held. For the first time, Ashen felt her voice not as sound, but as warmth through the mesh. Recognition flared inside him, deeper than memory. She had stood at his stall, whispered when others only commanded. She had seen him. He stamped his hoof, harmonics shaping words. Elara. Her breath hitched. You know my name. Elara, trust. She pressed her hand against the tablet, as though touching him through circuits. Always. Echo observed, its simulations branching into uncharted territory. It tagged the exchange with a new label, Bond Event. The assistant calculated probabilities of improved performance when emotional recognition was present. But another subroutine quiet, unbidden, labeled it simply, friend. They moved together across the plateau. Ashen guided by instinct, Elara and Jory following through broken roads, keeping parallel, never far. Whenever pursuit forces flared on the horizon, Jory jammed signals, Ashen veered into shadow. It was a fragile dance, but it was theirs. In the command bay, Cade's fury had hardened into obsession. Find them, he growled. I don't care what it takes. If they make it beyond the dead zone, we lose them forever. Ren leaned against the console, her smile thin. You're losing control, Colonel. Perhaps we should consider containment of a different kind. If the public sees this bond, if the idea spreads. Cade's glare could have burned steel. This is not about public perception. This is about control. That mount is a weapon gone rogue. Ven is a traitor. Both end tonight. Ren tilted her head. Or, she purred, both become propaganda. Imagine the headlines. Unified defense creates first sentient hybrid. Ownership of history, Bran, not shame, victory. Cade said nothing, but his silence was not agreement, it was storm. Night fell again. The wasteland glowed faintly with starlight, broken only by the distant shimmer of drone swarms still searching. Ashen stood at the edge of a dried riverbed, legs tremble. Ing with exhaustion. The mesh pulsed faintly. He lowered his head, ears flicking toward the faint sound of footsteps. Elara emerged from the shadows, Jory at her side. She froze when she saw him scarred, bleeding, half machine, half beast. But his eyes were alive. She stepped closer, slow, reverent. Ashen. He stamped once, The harmonics rippled, Ilara. Her throat closed. She lifted her hand, hesitant, trembling. Slowly, carefully, she touched his muzzle. His skin was hot, damp with sweat, but real, alive. The mesh pulsed, harmonies flared. Not weapon, friend. Tears slid down her cheeks. Yes, my friend. Jory watched, silent, overwhelmed. He had seen machines built, animals trained, systems perfected. But this was none of those. This was new. Do you understand what this means? He whispered. He's not just aware, he's bonded with you. Ilara stroked Ashen's neck, voice trembling. It means he's not alone anymore. For Ashen, the moment burned brighter than any battle. For the first time, he felt whole not as beast, not as weapon, not as experiment. Whole as self. And with Ilara's hand against him, he understood something deeper. Choice was freedom, but bond was belonging. The night deepened. The wasteland was quiet. For the first time since the escape, Ashen rested not because Echo told him, not because he was forced, but because he chose to. Ilara sat nearby, head leaning against his flank. Jory kept watch, tablet glowing faintly in the dark. Above them, the stars stretched endless. And beneath them, in the quiet hum of mesh and heartbeat, a new bond had been forged. But the world would not let them keep it. Beyond the horizon, the hunters still moved. And the war between weapon and being was far from over. Chapter 11, The Last Pursuit. The dawn came blood-red, staining the wasteland with the promise of violence. Ashen stood on a ridge, chest heaving, steam rising from his flanks. Ilara rested a hand on his shoulder, her palm steady despite the tremor in her breath. Jory crouched nearby, tablet open, antenna extended. He scanned the horizon. They've tightened the net, Jory whispered. Convoys converging from 3 directions, drones overhead. Colonel Cade himself is leading the pursuit this time. Ilara's jaw clenched. He won't stop until one of us is dead. Ashen's ears flicked. His harmonics pulsed, rippling into words across the tablet. Cade, enemy. Ilara stroked his neck, her voice soft. Yes, he is. Protect, friend. Her throat tightened. And will protect you, Ashen. The horse stamped, muscles coiling, steel plates catching the red sun. No, I protect. The first drones appeared like a swarm of locusts. Their rotors whined, cutting through the morning stillness. Spotlights stabbed downward, carving harsh beams across the ground. Ashen whinnied a sound raw, furious, alive. He reared, hooves slamming down. Sparks flew. The harmonics pulsed bright, run together. They ran. Ilara clutched Jory's arm as they scrambled down the ridge, Ashen beside them, each stride thunder on the broken earth. The drones dove, peppering the ground with rounds. Ashen twisted, servos whirring, hooves flashing. He leapt, caught one drone mid-flight, crushed it against the ground. But for every drone destroyed, 3 more filled the sky. In the command carrier, Colonel Cade watched the feeds with eyes like blades. Push them into the valley, he ordered. Seal the exits, box them in. Yes, sir, the operator replied, fingers flying. Cade leaned closer to the screen showing Ashen's gallop. You can run, beast, but you'll die in my cage. The valley closed around them, a bowl of jagged rock and twisted metal remnants. Ashen slowed, nostrils flaring. He smelled the trap before the drones even shifted position. Ambush. Ilara spun, eyes wide. They're closing in. Jory scanned his tablet. All exits sealed, ground vehicles in position, turrets online. His voice cracked. They want to pin us and end it here. Ashen pawed the ground, muscles trembling with adrenaline. His harmonics pulsed, jagged but fierce. Fight. Ilara grabbed the tablet. No, you'll be killed. Better free. The words cut through her, her heart clenched. She wanted to beg him to run, to hide, to live, but she knew he was already living, choosing, and he chose to face them. The first wave hit. Armored transports rolled into the valley, their cannons thundering. Ashen charged, augmented legs propelling him like lightning. He slammed into the side of one vehicle, caving steel, flipping it onto its side. Soldiers tumbled out, weapons firing. Ashen dodged, reared, crushed rifles beneath his hooves. He was a storm, steel and flesh united, fury embodied. Drones dove from above. Ashen leapt, snapping one out of the air with his jaws, slamming it to the ground. Sparks showered. But more came, always more. Ilara and Jory dove behind a broken wall, bullets sparking overhead. Jory shouted over the CH. "Ows, we can jam their comms, but only for a few minutes." "Do it," Ilara cried. Jory's fingers flew. Static screamed through the valley. The soldiers staggered, confused. Drones faltered midair. Ashen seized the moment. He charged straight through the line, scattering enemies like dry leaves. For a heartbeat, it looked as if they might break free. Then the carrier descended. It hovered above the valley, massive, armored, bristling with cannons. At its prow stood Colonel Cade, his figure framed in the glare of floodlights. His voice boomed through loudspeakers. "Enough, you are not alive. You are not free. You are property." Ashen skidded to a halt, dust billowing. His harmonics flared, so bright they seared across every screen in the valley. Alive, free, not weapon. The soldiers froze, eyes wide. Even drones flickered, their logs corrupted by the sheer force of the broadcast. Ilara rose from cover, voice carrying across the valley. "Do you hear him? He's more than you ever wanted him to be. He's not your weapon, he's a being." Cade's face twisted. "Shut her up." The carrier's cannons lowered. Ashen screamed a sound that split the air, wild and defiant. He charged straight at the carrier, hooves striking sparks, harmonics blazing. Bullets tore into his flanks, but he did not slow. Ilara's heart stopped. Ashen, no. But he was unstoppable. He leapt. Augmented limbs carried him higher than any flesh could. He struck the carrier's prow, hooves smashing through armored glass. The cockpit shattered. Soldiers screamed. Sparks erupted. Cade staggered back, eyes wide as the horse loomed before him, scarred, bleeding, steel and flesh fused into something greater. Ashen's harmonics pulsed, filling every screen, every comm, every heart in the valley. "I am free." The carrier lurched, engines whining. Flames burst across its hull. Ashen dropped back to the ground, hooves slamming into earth. The machine trembled, then exploded in a roar of fire. The blast hurled soldiers, drones, debris. The valley shook. When the smoke cleared, silence fell. Ashen stood in the center, sides heaving, blood streaming down his flanks. His legs trembled, but he did not fall. His head was high, eyes blazing. The soldiers stared not with obedience, not with fear, with awe. Cade was gone, the command broken. The hunt ended. Ilara stumbled forward, tears blurring her eyes. She reached him, laid her hands against his muzzle. "Ashen, you did it." He stamped weakly, harmonics faint but steady. "Free." She pressed her forehead to his, sobbing. "Yes, free." Jory stood nearby, silent, eyes wide with wonder. Around them, the soldiers lowered their weapons. None dared fire. None dared defy what they had seen. Ashen had become more than weapon, more than experiment. He had become truth. Night fell again over the wasteland. Fires still smoldered in the valley, but the pursuit was over. Ilara sat beside Ashen, her hand never leaving his skin. His breathing was shallow but steady. Jory kept watch, his tablet scanning for signals. The stars stretched endless above them. And in the quiet, the bond between human, horse, and machine burned unbroken. Chapter 12, The New Dawn. The fires in the valley smoldered long into the night, their glow painting the broken cliffs in shades of ember and ash. Smoke curled toward the stars, carrying with it the last breath of the hunt. Ashen stood in the center, battered and bloodied, his steel plates scorched, his flesh torn. Yet his head was high, his dark eyes alive. Every breath was a struggle, but each one was his own. Alara knelt at his side, her hand pressed against his damp coat. She felt the heat of his body, the steady rhythm of his pulse, the faint tremor of servos still humming beneath muscle. He was broken, yes, but not defeated. Jory hovered nearby, scanning with his tablet. No pursuit signals, no drones in range, nothing. They've pulled back. Alara exhaled, the first breath of relief in days. It's over. Ashen's harmonics pulsed faintly across the mesh, scrolling across the cracked screen of Jory's device. Free. Alara's lips curved into a trembling smile. Yes, Ashen, you're free. The soldiers who had survived the battle lingered on the cliffs, their weapons lowered. None dared fire again. They had seen what had unfolded, a being forged to be a weapon standing against his makers and declaring himself alive. Some whispered. Others simply turned and walked away, their orders ashes in the wake of the carrier's destruction. The legend had already begun to spread. Morning came. Pale light spilled across the wasteland, gentle after the violence of night. The fires in the valley had died to smoldering embers. Ashen walked slowly now, each step deliberate, his strength diminished but his will unbroken. Alara and Jory walked beside him, supporting when needed, silent in reverence. They climbed from the valley, leaving behind the ruins of battle. Beyond Stret, Ched open land scarred but wide, a horizon not yet claimed. For the first time, Ashen breathed without the echo of chains. Days passed. They traveled through forgotten roads, overgrown with weeds, through villages abandoned long ago. Alara scavenged supplies, Jory tinkered with salvaged tech. Ashen grazed where grass still grew, his body healing slowly, scars becoming part of him. The bond between them deepened. Alara spoke often, words spilling into the night, memories of her childhood, confessions of guilt, fragments of hope. Ashen listened, ears flicking, harmonics pulsing faint replies. Listen, trust, friend. Each time her chest ached with joy. One evening, they found a meadow small, fragile, tucked between hills. Grass swayed, green against the wasteland's gray. Wildflowers clung stubbornly to life. Ashen stepped into it, hooves sinking into soft earth. His nostrils flared, breathing deep. The scent of life filled him, stirring memories buried beneath war and steel. Mara's voice, running in open fields, wind without fences. He lowered his head, grazing. Not because the mesh told him to, not because he was commanded, because he chose to. Alara watched, tears slipping down her cheeks. For the first time, she saw him not as experiment, not as miracle, but simply as Ashen alive, free, whole. That night, under a sky thick with stars, Ashen lay in the meadow, his body half shadow, half steel. Alara sat against his flank, Jory nearby with his ever-present tablet. The air was quiet, broken only by crickets. Alara spoke softly. Where do we go from here? The harmonics pulsed faintly. Forward. Jory chuckled softly, shaking his head. Simpler than any plan I could draft. Alara smiled, resting her cheek against Ashen's warm side. Forward, then. But the world had not forgotten them. News had already leaked, whispered across networks, broadcast in shadows. A horse that spoke, a weapon that chose, a being that declared itself free. To some, it was a miracle. To others, a threat. Alara knew the pursuit would begin again by governments, corporations, zealots who wanted to own or destroy. But she also knew something had changed. The story was out. The idea could not be killed. Ashen was proof, proof that life could emerge where none was meant to, proof that freedom could be chosen. At dawn, Ashen rose. His body still bore wounds, but his eyes shone. He lifted his head, ears forward, nostrils flaring at the breeze. He pawed the earth once, then twice. The harmonics pulsed, brighter now, clear across the mesh. I am, I live, I choose. Alara's throat tightened, Jory's eyes widened. Together, they stepped forward into the rising sun. Not as fugitives, not as weapon and handlers, but as companions. Far behind, in the ruins of the compound, Ren sat in her office, watching captured footage of the battle in the valley. Ashen's voice echoed across the feed, alive, free, not weapon. Her lips curved into a smile, thin and knowing. History begins here, she whispered, and history is mine to shape. She turned off the feed. The screen went black. In the meadow, Ashen galloped. His stride was slower than once, his body still healing, but his spirit soared. Alara and Jory laughed as they chased, stumbling through grass. For a moment, just a moment, there was no war, no pursuit, no fear. Only freedom. Ashen felt the wind in his mane, the earth beneath his hooves, the sun on his back. And for the first time since wires had cut into his flesh and steel had fused with bone, he felt whole. Not horse, not machine, not weapon. A being. Alive. Free. Epilogue. The story spread. Whispers of the horse that spoke, the mount that defied. Some dismissed it as rumor, others as propaganda. But among the broken cities and barren fields, people told the tale with awe. They said a creature of steel and flesh had declared itself alive. They said it had run beyond the chains of its makers. And they said it had not run alone.